A genocide would be the intent, okay, for a population to eliminate another population.
So again, stretching that definition, we didn't kill them all, so it's fine. You know, you can't say that, I think it's abhorrent when they all die, but no, it's not technically a genocide because we didn't kill them all. It's hard to give this guy standing. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of One Nerd All Things. I am Chewburger84, and this one is for the political nerds out there, geography nerds, I guess all kind of nerds interested in, I guess, this horrendously complicated issue, which is Israel, Palestine, who's right, who's wrong. It's never as simple as that. There's so many nuances of this topic. So whenever I see big debate opportunities like this, I cannot help but want to see these and react to these. This is by Jubilee, who obviously run fantastic concepts with the 20 versus 1 series. This particular one is one Israeli person defending their stance against 20 Palestinian pro-activists. So I'm really curious to see what they've got to say. I hope that everyone's not just sticking to the standard tropes that have been banded around over and over again, but we'll see. I'm not going to waste time. We're going to get into it shortly. But firstly, a huge thank you to those of you who have been liking, commenting, subscribing. It really helps the small channel grow. I think we're up to 40 subscribers so far, which is fantastic. And if you haven't done one of those things, but you like this video at the end of it, I'd love it if you did. But let me earn it first, ladies and gentlemen. Let me entertain you. Let me react to this fantastic debate that is coming up. Really curious to see what comes out of it. All right, let's not waste any more time. Let's do this.
It's been more than 2 years since October 7th, when Hamas attacked Israel, killing over 1,200 innocent people and taking hundreds of hostages.
Okay, you never want to do this too early, and I know the numbers game is a hotly debated thing, where every time someone says, well, one side says these numbers, someone else says the numbers aren't accurate. So look, from most reported sources, there was about 1,200 deaths, absolutely. There was several hundred, I think it was 250-ish, hostages taken in the horrendous and barbaric attack on Israel on October 7. No denying this was a horrendous, condemnable attack. However, there's an argument to be made of innocent. Okay, so certainly around 800-ish of these people were absolutely innocent civilians, right? That's been documented. But there is around that 300 to 350 that's been reported were IDF soldiers. So given the ongoing conflict, there is a debate to be had. Can they be counted as innocent bystanders in this conflict when perhaps they were the first targets? Don't know. Were they enjoying their time as civilians at that time? Don't know. Or were they actively slain in the combat, like basically fighting back the Hamas terrorists? Not sure. But I mean, these numbers, it's very easy to get caught up in them. I mean, obviously, all of these deaths were horrendously saddening. You never want innocent people to die. But this is where it gets murky. You know, that the IDF soldiers have been part of a persecution of Gaza historically, of Palestine, of the occupied West Bank. We've all seen dozens and dozens and dozens of footage coming out showing the way the IDF treats people, especially in the West Bank. So to call them innocent, it's a tough one. For me, I think the soldiers should be separated out from that number because obviously they're the people who, when two nations are at war, it's always sad, it's always a loss, but at the end of the day, I don't think you can count them as innocent. So I know it seems like such a little point here, but I'm sure it's going to get brought up on the other side later on. We're going to go, well, most of the people that died on the other side were Hamas, so you can't count them. You know, that was who we were going for. The civilians was only this much, you know? So I think we need to keep that fair and balanced on both sides.
The war that followed has devastated Gaza, killing over 70,000 Palestinians. Peace now rests on a ceasefire that many believe will not hold. So where do we go from here? From Jubilee Media, this is Surrounded.
So there's already been hundreds of breaches of this ceasefire, several on the side of Hamas, but we are far, far higher on the Israeli side, if you were to believe the reporting. Right, since this ceasefire for Gaza, before the Iran conflict has been triggered, that there have been very, very frequently documented breaches, including several high-profile breaches as well, where you've had journalists trying to cover things on the ground being attacked by Israeli forces.
One brave soul faces a room full of disagreeers. I'm your host, John Regalado, and today we are facing the divide head on. I'm here in the center with our featured guest, Rudy. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for being here. Are you ready to jump into the debates?
Always ready.
All right. Debaters, are we ready?
Do you know, I'm going to give credit to this dude on the left because it'd be super tempting to be someone of the Jewish faith, which I'm imagining he is, given obviously he's shul, but not going like the full yarmulke. Like you'll see guys like Ben Shapiro will come out and they will just overly amp up, you know, the factor to try and like really put out there, you know, with all the bullet points, you know, I'm Jewish, I'm Jewish, I'm Jewish. This guy's actually kept it relatively low key, you know, and I'm sure there's going to be people on the other side of the Muslim faith that are in their traditional gear, which is fine on both sides, by the way. I'm surprised that he didn't wear a yarmulke, but I'm wondering if like subconsciously he's made this choice, or maybe it's a representation of his version of his sect of his faith. I don't know, but it's always curious. Like whenever I see these debates or I see someone with a talking point as a Jewish faith advocate or as an Israeli advocate, very commonly they're wearing the yarmulke on the top. So, I mean, just a subtle detail that I'm curious about. Did he think about this before he came into this debate?
Ready to begin? All right, let's get into it.
I'm Rudy Rockman. I'm a Jewish and Israel rights activist, and today I'm surrounded by 20 pro-Palestinian activists who completely disagree with me.
It's going to be rough being this guy in this particular time, especially. For
My
sure.
first surrounded claim is that Israel is not committing apartheid or genocide.
All right, if you would like to
I mean, I don't know how
be
you
the first
defend this.
debater,
I'm
please get
super
to the
curious
chair
to see
in
how he
3,
tries.
2, 1.
How's it going?
Yeah, I'd want to run for that one too.
So, before I start, I want to lay some groundwork. I want to start with a working definition of genocide, some legal and historical examples, and then I want to demonstrate Israel's intent, their policies
in
of
the background.
genocide,
He
and
knows he's on
then
camera.
the results. So, in terms of a working definition of genocide, it would be to destroy, with the intent to destroy a group in whole or in part. Some historical legal analogies that I think are analogous to the case of Gaza is the case in Bosnia, where the Bosnian Serb army killed 8,000 men and boys. This was ruled to be a genocide by the ICJ. Another 30,000 women and children were forced to flee. This was done so to facilitate an ethnic cleansing. So murder under the laws of war to motivate a population to be ethnically cleansed.
Now, ethnically cleanse is one of those debatable terms as well, because ethnically cleanse can mean obviously death and destruction, or it can mean just trying to get rid of them from the country. Like we don't want them to be there. It's one of those like minor nuances between the genocide. And I've seen people debate the term genocide as well, going, oh, it can't possibly be a genocide because there's some still there. But that's like the argument of going, well, in Nazi Germany, it wasn't a genocide because there are some still there. Like when I hear that argument, it drives me crazy because like if any survived, it didn't count, or it has to achieve a certain percentage of a population wiped out before it's officially a genocide. Whereas if we have a look from most of the international reporting on this, if you go to scholars who have researched genocide, who are on parts of these international committees, who declare war crimes, who declare genocides, most places at that level that are independent, that don't have political affiliations, are referring to this as a genocide. And I personally stand on the side of, by all appearances and the general definition, I think it definitely is qualifying for genocide and ethnic cleansing, because they are certainly trying everything they can to remove as many of these people from the country. They're trying to push them into Sinai, out towards Egypt. Obviously, Egyptians are not taking them. That's another talking point for a different day. But ultimately, I think it's pretty hard to say that either of those terms, that's not what has happened in Palestine and Gaza.
In terms of Israel's intent, Benjamin Netanyahu said it plainly and clearly last year under testimony with the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Knesset. He said, we're destroying more and more houses. Sooner or later, they'll have nothing to go back to.
Yeah.
Our problem right now is just finding a country that's going to take the Palestinian refugees. So they're murdering Palestinians in Gaza en masse to attempt to bring about the demise of the Gaza population.
Isn't there something fascinating about that full commentary that they included on the right there? Basically saying that obviously one of the problems is, you know, by destroying their homes, we're going to have to find somewhere there for them to go. But there are countries that are not really willing to take them. Doesn't it sound very similar to a particular situation at the end of the 1940s? You know what I mean? If you think about that commentary, like you could see someone in that part of the world, and I hate how much we're already referencing Germany, right? Because there's way too much conflation right now. On both sides of this argument, where everyone's Hitler, right? On every side of the argument. But ultimately, yeah, you see that argument of, well, we want them gone, right? But the challenge is no one's really wanting to take them right now. And because because Palestinians have been, you know, in this sort of westernized anti-Muslim catchment up until recent years, where you've seen sympathy kind of swing, then now you're seeing more of a pro-Palestinian stint or glance, I suppose. Historically, a lot of people wouldn't want to take them because we've seen what's happened when in some countries you take people who have been victims of war or persecution for a very long time, and then they get to a country that's a little bit more free, and then sometimes you do see negative outcomes happen. Sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes they immigrate, sometimes they assimilate, and then they become valuable members of that society, enriching its culture. You know, food alone, my God, food for the Middle East is some of the best, man. Honestly, Lebanese food especially, if you've never had a chance to do it, amazing. I know it's a weird, pro thing to go out and, have some hummus and what's the bread called now during this debate, but honestly, it'll make you feel better.
Create conditions unfit for human existence by decimating civilian infrastructure, et cetera. Now, in terms of a policy, we can look to the Where's Daddy program that's being used by Israeli intelligence through a Lavender AI system where they spot what they suspect to be low-level Hamas operatives, bomb them when they're at home with their family. So you can't claim Hamas is using Palestinians as human shields when most of what Israel is actually doing is targeting who they suspect to be low-level.
I don't think that's a great argument. I mean, there's no argument that Hamas is absolutely using human shields, right? They have built pathways, labyrinthine passageways underneath Gaza. Now, it's not 100% in civilian populations, but obviously there is some there. But an argument I have about the whole, well, they're always in the wrong because they build things near civilian infrastructure is, number one, there is obviously large targets militarily in Tel Aviv, right in the middle of the civilian population, right? To take out their anti-Iron Dome systems, you would have to hit downtown Tel Aviv. Their version of the Pentagon is relatively central as well. So to take out the leaders or the military leaders, right, in Tel Aviv, you would have to hit a very populated area of Israel. So that is, in my opinion, the same level of wrong. However, obviously Israel does have the bulk of their military infrastructure outside of Tel Aviv, right, outside of those areas. But they've had the flexibility to do it. I think, don't get me wrong, it is wrong using human shields. But I also believe that if you are not allowed to form a military in Palestine, which they're not by Israeli law, like they want Hamas to disarm and they want no arms to be able to be presented in Palestine whatsoever. That's been made abundantly clear over and over again. I think a comment last year was every AK-47 is part of what they want from Hamas and obviously Palestine in general. Complete disarmament, no defenses are possible, which is obviously a huge sticking point for the negotiations. But if they were allowed to form a government, and if they're allowed to form a military, then do you think that they might build those infrastructure outside of civilian areas? I would argue that they might, right? But unless we get into a timeline where that's able to happen, it's impossible to know. So I think this guy's point is wrong, though. They're absolutely using human shields. But the big difference between this conflict and a lot previously is that human shields used to be an effective tactic. Okay, hostages used to be an effective tactic because there was a distinct value in human life, that you didn't want to risk killing innocent civilians that had nothing to do with this conflict because, one, it is barbaric and horrendously wrong, but two, the optics aren't great. It's hard to sell to the world when you've killed a bunch of civilians to get to one guy that you needed to kill. But this particular conflict, the human shields don't matter. So yes, it is absolutely wrong for Hamas to use human shields, but it is equally as wrong to murder tens of thousands of people to get to thousands of soldiers, right? The ratios don't ratio, right? The amount of civilians to combatant deaths in Palestine are not even close to them deliberately trying to avoid hitting civilians. And you hear this, well, they're the most moral army in the world from people like Huckabee. But because they go in and they leaflet drop something into Palestine from a plane saying, hey, we're going to bomb you tomorrow, don't be there. Or my favorite one is the internet posts where they post up, hey, just letting you know we're going to bomb this area tomorrow, don't be there. And then they block out all the internet, right? They actively use jammers so that they can't get in that message, right? So they don't know what's coming. But then we've also seen instances where After they've been moved to this new neutral location that wasn't on the target list, all of a sudden that's hit. And there's even been a few documentations of double tap strikes as well. A double tap strike, for those of you who haven't heard it before, basically it's an old school, very horrendous military tactic where you hit an area that obviously causes mass carnage and damage. And that obviously triggers first responders and families trying to rush in to protect their loved ones. Then you hit it again to maximize casualties and maximize confusion. It is a horrendous and unbelievably illegal tactic under what was international law, but who knows if that exists anymore. But ultimately, it's a horrible, horrible strategy. So I know this has gone longer from this one comment this guy made. So I don't agree with what he's saying that the human shields thing doesn't matter. It is gross that Hamas does this. It absolutely is. But I would argue it is as, in my opinion, probably more disgusting that Israel does not care. And sorry, the IDF, I should clarify, doesn't care. That they're continuing to bombard and just annihilate, during the conflict. Obviously, we are in this ceasefire. But during the conflict, they went through it anyway. Right? And this argument of, well, if you're dumb enough to stay there near a target, you deserve it. And yes, that phrase has been uttered by a member of the Israeli parliament.
Hamas operatives when they're with their family. This is backed up by the demographic data. Reuters pointed to the fact that over 1,300 families' bloodlines have been wiped out in Gaza.
True.
Sometimes as much as 4 generations of Palestinian families are being wiped out. Sometimes as large as 14 members of a Palestinian family is being wiped out.
What's interesting about that is, like, you can kill 4 generations of a family in Palestine, right? You can wipe out a bloodline that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. Whereas ultimately, the Israelis themselves don't have that. I mean, they're relatively new. Like, they might be into their, second, third generation national-born folks, right? Everyone else was imported from the 1940s, predominantly from Europe. So it's not like you can inflict that same amount of damage because the history is not there. And I'm sure the historic argument's going to come up somewhere here about, 3,000 years ago, but we'll get there.
Again, we have policy, and then we look to the effects. 65 doctors wrote in the New York Times in a guest opinion essay, doctors that are observing in Gaza, they're participating, they're volunteering in Gaza. We don't have international journalists in Gaza, so the extent to which our international testimony.
If you want to ruin your day, and I mean, please don't watch this if you're in the wrong headspace, right? Because it will get you there. Look at those interviews from those doctors. Like, the amount of them that break down crying with what they've seen done to Palestinian civilians, it is heartbreaking. Right? And anyone who says, well, you can't trust, numbers from the from the Palestinian Health Institute, even though those numbers have been verified by now, the numbers of casualties by the Israeli outlets as well. And their own government admitted that it's definitely over 70,000 only a couple of months ago. If you want to ruin your day, watch those, because the tactics that they talk about and what happens, especially to these kids, my God, it is just the worst of the worst.
Are often from these doctors, paramedics, and nurses. What they described.
So let me answer.
Sure.
You said a lot of things.
Yeah,
right?
sure, go for it.
So first of all, I'm against the murder of any individual person living in Gaza. I see Palestinians as my family, as my cousins. If I see another individual who's, let's say, from America or a Palestinian, I will automatically feel more connected to a Palestinian. We have mostly the same ancestry. We're connected to the same land, and our descendants will be eternally connected to one another. So whenever I see a Palestinian innocent life taken, that is a horrible tragedy. But you got something wrong from the very beginning. That genocide is the intent to eliminate a population. Now, you might not be successful. So they were not successful in many cases with Nazi Germany, with the army.
All right, so let's read this definition on the right for those who are only hearing the audio of this. Under Article 2 of the Convention, the Prevention and Punishment of Crime of Genocide is defined as, and this was in 1948, any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, killing members of the group or causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. So if we're going down the definition part, and again, we spend way too much time talking about the definition of this specifically, really, to me, frustrates me about, tens of thousands of people are dead, right? So, it's not technically a genocide because we could have killed 150,000. We could have killed 1 million. And that would have been genocide. But to the moment, we're not that bad, right? Anyway, let's see what he finishes out of this. But so far, the fact checked here means he's wrong out of the gate.
Armenians, but it was the intent to try to eliminate the population. Now,
So can I ask you then?
Let me.
Do you think that the Bosnian Serb army did not commit genocide in Serbia?
I think if the intent was to eliminate the entire population, then it would be a genocide. If the intent is to kill a lot of people in order to do ethnic cleansing, which is another thing, which is also problematic. Okay, but
so you're saying it's ethnic cleansing, not genocide.
No, I'm not saying what's going on is ethnic cleansing. I'm saying that there are individual politicians who support the idea of removing Palestinians.
I'm not talking about individual politicians. I'm talking about Benjamin Netanyahu,
which would be ethnic cleansing, and I'm against that.
And you agree that the quote I cited earlier would be the intent for ethnic cleansing.
I think the guy on the right, going back to the whole Bosnia thing, like this whole, let's put up the straw man, or let's just have everything tied to, oh, if you don't agree with this, then the whole thing falls apart. So no, stay on the topic of this, man. This is Israel, this is Palestine, this is this conflict. I don't like the sidestep kind of stuff of, well, let me catch you out on a little definition. I think it's a weak strategy to myself.
Right?
The way that you sourced it would be, but I don't think that that's actually what he said.
That's from Times of Israel.
We should fact check it and see the whole entire context.
Okay, yeah,
if we find
Times of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu quote.
If we find that Bibi Netanyahu has the intent to remove all the Palestinians from Gaza, I am against it.
And you would say that.
I mean, good man for saying that. But also, it's not just him. I mean, obviously, the US have got plans there as well. Like you saw that interview with Jared Kushner, I think it was Steve Witkoff, that were drawing up their plans for, Las Vegas, Gaza, and they were talking about how some of these plans, I think someone slipped in that interview, we're talking about how they've had designs on rebuilding Gaza to be this luxury resort location for the better part of 2 years, which was only just at the absolute onset of this. So to say that there is no plans to eliminate the people of Palestine, whether it be ending their lives or whether it be trying to push them out to other nations, the evidence just isn't true. There's way more evidence that not only are there members of the Israeli parliament and IDF that absolutely want this and believe in this, but then you've even got, some evidence that the Americans want this. I mean, Trump, how many times has he talked about that he wants to build it to be the golden blah, 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 whatever in the Middle East? Right? And one of the most disgusting, perfect examples of capitalism taking over the world and that we really report to our overlord capitalist masters, then those statements he made is about, we're going to knock down this shithole, basically, and we're going to build luxury resorts like you've never seen. That comment was one of the most disgusting things I have ever heard in my lifetime.
That's ethnic cleansing.
That would be ethnic cleansing.
Okay, great. So we can source that. Amazing.
Now that we're agreeing that there's a difference between ethnic cleansing and genocide, and that I'm against both, let's talk about the claim of it being genocide. Now, when we look at 2.2 million people living in Gaza, and max number is 70,000 by Hamas records, which we know Hamas is constantly lying of how many people are dying.
I knew this was going to happen. See, again, it has been reported on and confirmed by Israeli sources multiple times, right? This constantly happens. But yet these same individuals will be the first ones to point out, but in Iran, like in recently, they've killed 30 to 40,000 protesters in the first parts of this year. But at the moment, we have no external proof that that happened, right? There's no outside sources other than the Israelis to say that happened. Now, there absolutely has been Iranian persecution casualties. They have definitely murdered innocent civilians, and that is horrendous and unbelievably abhorrent. But there is no proof that it was 40,000. So how can you sit there and say with absolute conviction, well, these numbers are wrong and overreported because they come from Hamas, even though they've been confirmed by international doctors, international communities of healthcare, and international communities of NGOs and charities, as well as obviously the Israeli government and Israeli media sources themselves. They're all committing to say it is over 70,000. But everyone keeps trotting out this line of, well, I don't know if we can believe those numbers. Well, where are these numbers coming from Iran? Like, you can't sit there and pick and choose which numbers you don't like and then say, well, no, consider the source, we have to get rid of it. Mind you, I might add that it's really hard to get sources inside Israel when they keep either banning journalists from reporting what is really going on the ground, right? So if you film the skyline of Israel when it's being attacked, you will be arrested, fined, or worse. And in the last week alone, we have had 3 deliberate targetings of international journalists in Lebanon, right? There is significant amounts of very well-documented war crimes committed by Israel over the last 3 or 4 years alone, where they have deliberately targeted journalists who are saying what they believe to be anti-Israel things, or in what they would call propaganda. It's insane, right? So I think this is one of the weakest arguments that this side's got. Well, we can't believe the numbers, even though those numbers have been confirmed and re-uttered, and the numbers keep mathing all over and over again, right, by international sources. So this argument has to stop because it has no legs anymore. And to purposely put your head in the sand and say, well, no, this is just Hamas numbers, man, so I don't believe it. Well, I mean, Germany numbers don't count because of what happened back then, right? Or we have to get rid of the Iranian casualty numbers for the civilians killed because those numbers came out of what? Iran or Israel? Like, where do those numbers come from? So I think it is a very, very foolish tactic. And the more that people do this now that there is so much verified reported evidence, is just a very bad choice. And this guy Smirk, right, the Palestinian supporter on the right, tells me he knows it.
70,000 people to have died. Also, this is in the past 2 years. There are 5,000 people who are dying from natural causes every year, which is also included. The Hamas number...
By the way, if we're going to do this, since he's saying, well, a lot of these people would have died anyway, the 70,000 is people who they can document died like literally from the wounds, like they were killed by a bullet on the spot or a bomb, right? What you don't have counted in those numbers is the secondary things that come after. So if you read a lot of the reporting on this, is that a lot of the deaths are not necessarily attributed to the war itself or the actions of the IDF, right? So they don't count them. But if you have a heart attack 3 weeks later, right, as a post-surgical complication because you had your leg amputated because it was torn to shreds by a bomb, they don't count that, right? So if anything, most of the reports on these numbers are saying that these numbers are actually underestimated, not overestimated. And that's worthwhile exploring, right? If you're going to sit there and say, well, some of these people would have died anyway, let's add in all the things. What about famine? What about starvation? What about people dying from malnutrition because they haven't been able to get food when they had the blockades on during the peak of this particular crisis? And then when they had these spots set up, run by this Israeli-owned NGO, we're saying, okay, there's the food, go and get it. And then we saw IDF snipers taking shots at them as they were running. So then they were too terrified to go and get the food, right? To say that, oh, some people are going to die anyway. But I think I know where he's going with this argument, and it's not a good idea.
The natural causes are not included. That's false. If natural causes were included, you would see excess death among youth and among elderly. You don't see that with the demographic data. The demographic data is actually directly from Israeli airstrikes.
No, it's directly from Hamas.
It's the Gaza Ministry of Health, which has been reliable.
Which is Hamas.
Okay, they've been reliable in every other armed
that
conflict.
Seeks to kill civilians is giving you your information.
Let me ask you this: why doesn't the Israeli military, if the Israeli military was,
I don't know why people are giving him the red flag here, because I mean, obviously the way he's arguing is not great, but the point is true. Like, I mean, Hamas, it's not just them reporting these numbers. So to belittle that, I think
under
it's
the
just
laws of war, they would know how many Palestinian civilians have died. Why don't they
being killed? Only 70,000 to the max number. That is a small amount of people and very clearly not a genocide.
See, again, I hate this, right? To basically say, well, we only killed 70,000, and because it's below, I mean, what percentage is a genocide to you then, dude? Like, how many people is it? Is it 10%? Is it 20? Is it 80? Right? And this argument pisses me off so much because it belittles this 70,000, right? Like they wouldn't have stopped there, right? If the international community hadn't put this insane pressure to bring this to a close, and if Hamas hadn't come through and handed over the remaining hostages and bodies at the end, let's be real, this would still be going. And it is still happening now. Like, we are seeing a massive expansion of settlements in the West Bank as we speak. The continued and ongoing and now expanding occupation of the West Bank is getting worse. So I think that it's such a disgusting argument. Like, just to say, well, I don't think it's a genocide. Okay, if we took the labels out of all this, do you think 70,000 people is excessive? I wish I could be in the room to phrase it that way. Do you think that given the small number of Hamas soldiers that appear to be in that country, that 70,000 casualties of innocent civilians, right? Obviously, there are some Hamas people in there as well. But do you think that that ratio seems insanely messed up and that it appears to have one of the worst combatant to civilian death ratios of any conflict on record, right? Do you think it's excessive? If you don't want to put the word genocide on there, fine. But the apartheid thing, we haven't even got to that yet, but it's definitely a genocide or an intent to commit genocide or ethnic cleansing, right? I do not see how you can say, well, it's only 70,000, therefore I don't think it is, right? He has admitted that these deaths of civilians are wrong, but I would have loved to push him more on that point. So let's see who comes in
next. Been
next.
voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Hello.
Salam.
Shalom.
How are you?
Comment allez-vous?
Très bien.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Comment nishmacha?
Baruch Hashem, how are
Just
you?
showing off there,
Very
boys.
good. For a moment, I wanted to believe that you really wanted peace. For a moment, I really almost believed that you wanted the Palestinians to go back to Palestine. But then when you ridiculed and you belittled 70,000 deaths, and you're saying that's just a small percentage for
Yeah.
1.2 million, that is outrageous.
That is not what I said.
That's
It
what I've
is a
heard you
little bit.
saying.
No, what I said is it's not a genocide, because if it was a genocide, we'd see the intent and the
If-
actual murder of a lot of people. And I started.
For the death of
The intent is there, and let me tell you how I can prove it. Israel says that Hamas is using human shields. True. Definitely are. They know innocent people are going to die. Number two, they send out email of intent. They do a letter from the sky of intent. They do a social media post of intent. We are going to bomb this area tomorrow, regardless of who is there. We don't care. If you don't want to die, don't be there. Right? That's two different levels of intent. You know there are civilians there because they're being used disgustingly as human shields. You are calling your shot to say, hey, tomorrow, boom's going to happen. And if you're in the way, that is your fault. You can't say that there is not an intent to kill these civilians, right? Now, would they have done this if Hamas was embedded in a skyscraper in Tel Aviv? I bet you they wouldn't. Why? Because they're Israelis. That's their people. When it's Palestinians, it doesn't matter. Their lives don't matter to them. So we can kill as many of them that we definitely know they're going to be there. To say that there is no intent to kill these people in very large numbers, which may not be a complete genocide, but it's definitely the foreplay.
Started with one person dying. That's Palestinian is horrible. Okay? So remember everything that I said. Palestinians are my family. If any Palestinian dies, that's horrible.
See,
But if we're
what
talking about
we are
intent,
seeing
it's
right now,
different.
what we're seeing right now is, and I hope I'm wrong, is a great act. Sadly,
wrong.
we've seen the president and Benjamin Netanyahu going out and saying we have to buy social media, we have to influence influencers, we have
This is all
to
true.
work on the young Americans and young Westerners so we can win the battle of the public.
I'm not going to lie, and obviously there's ego in this as well, but part of you wants to go when you're starting a channel like this. And obviously, I wish there was something else happening in the news so I could talk about. Like it wasn't this, but there's been so much coverage recently because of Iran on Israel, right? Is that I do wonder that given how much Israeli control that is starting to happen, or Israeli influenced control by, Israelis buying stakes or entire, media companies, and then us watching the rhetoric change completely, and then reports of people being, banned or shadow banned out of the gate. It does make you wonder, am I doomed to fail doing a channel like this if I cover topics like this? I would love to think that the ability of the internet and independent journalism, not that I'm a journalist, but can survive through this. That if we start to see specific editing of things going in and out when there is, quote unquote hate speech or what is now being labeled as anti-Semitic speech, that you can have your entire channel taken down because you might be critical of the actions of the IDF specifically, or because of the government of Israel, whereas every other nation on earth is allowed to have that criticism made of them. It's insane that could be a factor. It does make you wonder. I have to admit, it has crossed my mind. I would be lying if I didn't say that there was one video I wanted to make last week, and I got halfway through it, and I'm not going to lie, part of me went, oh man, if I say this, even though I think it's true, even though I think it's a fully defensible statement, I'm like, oh man, do I have to worry about like my future? Right? Because of the ability that some of these companies have. Like you have these opening statements in America by the anti-Semitic lobby. I can't remember their name, but they were sitting there parading around this lady in this big speech saying, if you are anti-Semitic, right, which I'm not, right, I have nothing against the Jewish people, but now this new label of being critical of Israel's actions, right, not them as a country, but their actions, is equivalent to being anti-Semitic. That we will find you, we will hunt you down, we will cost you your job, we will make you go bankrupt. And you hear all that and go, holy shit, that's an attack on everyone in the world. The way that Israel is currently threatening Spain, basically, calling on the US to expel them from NATO, and Trump going along with this because they're being critical of what Israel and the US have been doing in Iran, right? As a continuation, I mean, this is not new. Spain was very, very up in arms over the Palestinian conflict, as were the Italians. And now both of those countries are being threatened, and their religious leaders are being belittled and ridiculed because they disagreed with God King Trump. There's a lot of danger out there right now, a lot of threats to international free speech, but only in one direction, right? It's only this one area right now. Everyone's saying, no, you absolutely cannot have this discussion, or you are, insert horrendous label here, even though it's not true.
Opinion. Unfortunately, that's what I'm seeing right now. You having this soft attitude while serving in the Israeli army while people were getting killed. I'm a Palestinian. I'm not an anti-Semite. I'm a Semite. I'm not anti-Jewish. I have so many Jewish friends. But as long as it's legal, I'm going to go out and say every day
I will say this is the heartbreaking thing, is that before Israel was created in the 1940s, I know there are some of you are going to say, well, recreated. Ultimately, these two faiths lived in so much unbelievable peace in this land. Right now, I know a lot of people go, well, it wasn't technically Palestine back then, even though a lot of people were calling it that before it was carved up by the British and the Americans. Ultimately, these people lived in peace for generations. Do they have debate? Do they have issues? Do they have debates? Do they have sometimes conflicts break out on smaller scale? Yeah, of course. But not like this. That's the really sad thing, is that you used to see these families coexisting. The faiths was just a byproduct of it. They were all neighbors. They were all friends.
Anti-Zionism because I'm anti-apartheid, anti-genocide, anti-ethnic cleansing. The people here are labeled today as pro-Palestinians, as if it's something it's given. We're not just pro-Palestinian because Palestinians, we're pro-equality, justice, we're anti-racism. If Jewish people are going through the same, we will be pro-Jewish people as well. Trust me.
So do you condemn the attacks of Jews all around the world, including by Palestinians?
Yeah. I mean, why wouldn't you? I mean, we obviously are one of the more recent large-scale impacts here in Australia. Like, what happened at Bondi Beach is one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen in my life, right? Where these two psychopath gunmen went out and killed a bunch of civilian people, Australians, right? To me, they're Australians before anything else. Their faith doesn't matter to me. It wouldn't have mattered if they were Christians that got slaughtered, Muslims, Jewish people. It doesn't matter. To me, there were human lives in my country that got killed, right? Which is horrible, horrendous. It should never be the thing. But then he should also turn around and just say, well, if every one of those is a travesty, right, because they're being attacked because of who they are or where they are, then this is equally a travesty that is also horrendous, but also on a much larger scale. So by a logic train, to me, it is worse what is happening here, just on the numbers game alone.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Any innocent person that's been attacked without a justified reason, my faith tells me I
What
have
is a
to condemn
justified
it.
reason?
If they're not trying to kill you, if they're not trying to fight you.
If a Palestinian blows up a bus, is that justified?
You cannot put this
I'm just
out of
asking
context.
because you said justified.
Absolutely. No, when I say when you served in the army.
Yeah, but can you answer that real quick?
Absolutely, I can answer that.
Can you condemn that?
Absolutely, I'm telling.
Yeah, if a Palestinian terrorist tries to kill you, right, or if an IDF soldier tries to kill you and you kill them in defense, that seems like a justifiable act to me. I don't see why that would not be the case. But to then go and kill 70,000 of his friends, that's probably excessive.
I condemn the killing of any innocent soul. That's my faith is telling me to do.
Thank you.
All right. So now when you are trying to say that I am trying to promote peace and justice, why don't you join a movement like Breaking the Silence? Have you heard about them?
Of course I heard about them.
So why don't you join them?
I actually haven't.
Please.
So Breaking the Silence is an organization that takes some truths, adds on a lot of lies, and does everything in order to be tokens as Jews and as former soldiers who get paid by foreign entities. Where there's a new movement of people who aren't the
who get paid by foreign entities. So is this, am I right to believe then this is some sort of a movement inside Israel, I don't know, kind of like an AIPAC equivalent in America? Is that what he's talking about? And that's why it's not okay for them to have it in his country? That would be a weird thing to get at.
Tokens on either sides. There's individual Palestinians who are tokens as well who will sell whatever the Israeli government wants. Of individuals who are proud and who are strong and who want to see a future where there are people coming together. You said you're not an anti-Semite, but you're an anti-Zionist. Does that mean that you're against the idea that people have a right to live in this land?
I'm against that.
Yeah, I hate this argument because it's so semantic-y that people can get caught up to saying to be anti-Zionist is against Zionism. But again, Zionism has kind of been morphed and butchered. There's the original Zionist movement, which is that Israel has the right to have their own nation for the Jewish people and that should be allowed to thrive and live in safety, which I think almost every reasonable human being on planet Earth would say absolutely. But when we are seeing this sort of, new gen Zionism, which is now seeming to be redefined as Israel above everyone else, and that we have the right to expand and trying to achieve this greater Israel project, that's where this modern definition starts to really, come apart. And I think that's the problem, is that a lot of people, I think when they say anti-Zionist, at least I hope so, is they're basically saying, well, I'm against this current era of these people are number one, and then now you have these second-rate citizens. You only have to look as far as the recent announcement of the death penalty being something that can be punished on Palestinian residents of Israel that does not exist for Jewish residents of Israel. So when you have that two-tiered system, it is evidence of Israel above, right? We are a better race. We are a superior race. Or religion, whatever you want to call it. That's where I think a lot of people that say I'm anti-Zionist are coming from. And I think that being able to say that full sentence without being cut off going, oh, so you don't think we have a right to exist? That's what's about to come out of his mouth. Or he's already starting that wind up, right? To be anti-Zionist by the classical definition, I suppose that the Israeli gentleman is correct. That Zionism originally was people having the right to have a free, liberal place to live and, flourish under their Jewish faith. I believe they deserve that. I really do. But the new Zionism is something else, right? And I think that that's where a lot of people need to be far clearer about what they're saying when they're anti-Zionist.
The idea of what Zionism is doing.
No,
what
so Zionism is an idea. I'm asking, are you against the idea that the Jewish people have a right to self-determine on their ancestral homeland?
I knew it was coming.
You know who else did not have that problem?
By the way, the ancestral home part, that's probably the part I disagree with a little bit. I think that they absolutely deserve to have a place that they can thrive and flourish. But if they have a right because of historical occupation of that territory, that opens up the largest can of worms on planet Earth. That the amount of civilizations that have been murdered or wiped out or suppressed or kicked out of their traditional lands through conflict over tens of thousands of years of human history and conflict, then just about every human has some kind of a right to somewhere on Earth that they don't currently live. So this whole 3,000 years ago, and again, the evidence there as well is going back to some historical documents, but also religious text. Religious text, in my opinion, and this is a bias of mine, I'll admit to it freely, we're trusting all of these religious texts as, interpretations or the word of men alive at the time. And those men also tended to rise to some form of power and influence. So when we take the word of those people who stand to gain significant benefits because the word of God or whatever word of leader it is coming out of their mouth, so you should worship me, I've got problems with it. But I do think that, yeah, they do absolutely have the right to have that country. Do they deserve to have this land for this reason? Maybe. But should it be at the cost of other human beings? No.
I don't. I just told you.
Okay,
you know
great,
who
so
else?
you're not an anti-Zionist.
You know
you're
who
an
else?
anti the current conflict and everything that happened.
You know who else did not have a problem with Jewish people coming to Palestine?
A lot of Palestinians.
A lot of Palestinians.
Amazing.
Yeah.
They opened their doors.
And I don't
they
have a
opened their
problem with
homes.
Palestinians
Look
being
it
able
up.
to come home.
Mohammed Hadid, the father of Bella and Gigi Hadid. What is his story? His family opened their doors, their homes for a Jewish family, only to come back and say, you know what, this is our house now. You cannot come back again.
You won't see me condemning Palestinians as a whole. You won't see me
have
trying to delegitimize or to
You
demonize
just called.
Palestinians.
You keep calling it Yehuda and Samaria. You don't
It
even
is
call
Judea
it
and Samaria.
Palestine.
Historically, that region is Judea
the way
and Samaria.
Palestinians were kicked out of their home.
See, again, this whole denial, right? This is where I don't think it's fair on the Zionist argument. We deserve this land specifically because it was our home 3,000 years ago and was promised to us. They sit there and say that's absolutely it. And you have to acknowledge that there was an Israel here. But when other people come through and say, well, there was no other land there beforehand, and that based on a technicality, there was no Palestine, even though there were multiple entities, different groups and kingdoms that referred to it as a version of the word Palestine, even though it didn't have this official statehood tag, which is the current thing that people keep throwing out there, is that, well, technically they didn't meet the standards of being a nation state because they didn't have this name declared and written down this way, and they didn't file Form 43-2 to become officially Palestine, is bullshit. Right? You can't have it both ways. If you are saying that because of the history of this land that these guys have a stake to it, and that it existed because we say so from historical text, then so do the Palestinians.
The way a
Palestinians and
genocide,
Jews were kicked out.
the way a
This is something
genocide
we need to
happened in
both
Deir
condemn.
Yassin. Do you know what Deir Yassin is?
Yes, of course I know
You know
what
what happened in Deir Yassin?
I know what
That's a
happened in Deir Yassin.
genocide.
Let
A
him
genocide
finish.
would be the intent, okay, for a population to eliminate another
That's what
population.
happened.
So again, stretching that definition, we didn't kill them all, so it's fine. You know, you can't say that, I'm not, I think it's abhorrent when they all die, but no, it's not technically a genocide because we didn't kill them all. It's hard to give this guy standing.
What you had in 1948
Rudy,
is a
we wanna
conflict
hear-
between two peoples where people got kicked out on both sides,
Rudy,
and I'm
we-
against that.
We also want to hear from him.
Of course.
So you know the problem with the claim that Palestinians left by themselves, they fled.
I didn't make that claim.
That's ridiculous. When
didn't make
people
that
say
claim.
that, you know what, the government that you're supporting, the
not
army that you're
supporting the government.
defending, that is what they're saying. They're saying Palestinians left by themselves.
Some people say that. Some people don't say
oh,
that.
believe me, that a lot of people are saying
Yeah,
that.
there are Palestinians who chose to leave, and there are many Palestinians that were forcibly displaced. There's more nuance we need to add to the conversation. But there are also many Jewish villages that were displaced as well.
That's not what happened.
That is what happened. Why were there no more Jews in Jerusalem
Haganah
or in
and the
Hebron?
Argon, these are the militias, the terrorist militias that killed so many Palestinians. Those need
And
to be
they're-
read what happened in Deir Yassin.
Yes, I know what happened in Deir Yassin, and I know what happened in many other communities of Palestinians, and I'm for Palestinians
now
to be
in
able
Gaza-
to reunite with Israel. But you're looking at individuals that are in the context of a war and then blaming it on the whole idea of our whole collective having rights to this
See,
land.
the thing is that you
I'm
cannot
not-
Again, though, that applies to both sides. You're saying that the actions of a few don't justify the actions of the many, right? Or the rights of the many. But that's kind of what's happening here, right? The people of Palestine, or non-Jewish Israelis, I guess we could call some of the ones living in the now occupied West Bank, they don't have the same rights, right? But they're being persecuted for not being Israeli, right? So this shady ground.
Yes, if Trump says, I'm not anti-immigrants, we don't believe him. We look at what happened
Let's
in
not
the
bring
streets.
Trump into this situation.
See,
It has nothing to
you
do.
have to look at what's happening on the
Bringing in
ground.
foreign,
You have to look at what's
Western,
happening in
white
Gaza.
people
You have to look
into our civilization is why we're in a
saying
problem.
that Gazans were given warning to leave their homes before
This
they
is
get
true.
Wait,
bombed.
what was that comment? Bringing Western people into this conversation is part of the problem?
This is true.
This is the most ridiculous
This
thing
is-
I've heard.
Well, I was in Gaza and I saw this happening with my own eyes.
I'm just shocked that you're defending that
It's
again
not
and
defending.
again.
It's actually what happened. Does that
And
mean
what you're saying, it's okay?
No, it's not okay that we were in war. But
No, it's
absolutely-
okay to say to someone, hey, I'm bombing your house tomorrow, get out of here.
So let's add
Yeah.
some context. If Hamas is shooting rockets from a house, that also Palestinian families
this is
are
the
living there.
propaganda.
So if that's the case, then any attack that Iran has made in self-defense, because remember, the rockets left Israel first last year and this year, right? To give this equivalency, I know we're talking about Palestine in one conversation and Iran in another. Then that means that, those missiles, some of them are coming from Tel Aviv, right? There are things being launched at aircraft from inside Tel Aviv. So they've got every right, no matter who is around, to bomb the crap out of it. But I bet you that's not the way Israel feels when it happens. I bet you it's not. I bet you they say that this was deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure, which is horrendous and war crimes, and they throw all that out when it's beneficial to them. But the second that it's on the other side, well, it's Hamas's fault because there was people there and they hid behind them and they get what's coming to them.
That the
That's not
Israelis
propaganda.
promise-
This
trust
is you
me.
saying propaganda to things I witnessed with my own eyes. Before I witnessed it, I saw proof. Now I witnessed it. You cannot tell me it's propaganda
it
because
is
you were not there
propaganda.
during the war in Gaza.
it's-
And
I've
inshallah,
been-
one day we will both be able to go back in Gaza. But during the war, you were not there. This is what happened. When Hamas is shooting rockets from a house onto Israeli civilians, targeting Israeli
This is-
civilians, and Israel warns the Palestinians
the
living
war
there
did
to
not
leave.
start in
I don't
October
think it
7th.
started on October 7th.
75 years old.
And it didn't start in
old conflict.
1948 either.
So the fact
But
that
it
you're
can
pushing
end tomorrow.
Palestinians,
Well,
the fact that
This did start in the 1940s because there was no Israel before then. And there wasn't this conflict. There wasn't this massive casualties on both sides with the Jewish faith and the Muslims going toe to toe every other day. I mean, yes, there have been various conflicts fought over religious wars. I mean, with Christians as well for that part of the world. I mean, Jerusalem and the Crusades, right? There's been horrendous slaughter in that region on so many different fronts. But to say that this particular overall expanded complex conflict did not start by the creation of the new Israeli state is an insane statement.
you're
I'm not
pushing
pushing
Palestinians-
anybody.
Not you.
said
I'm
you.
not. I'm not about myself. I'm representing
You're making it
Palestine.
way
I'm
too
not representing
personal right now.
Israel. That's
We represent those peoples, but don't say
Correct.
you can say they are or Israel is. If something
but you
bad is
cannot come
happening
and
by
say
a
I'm
Palestinian,
defending a movement, I'm defending an ideology, and then
if you are for the Palestinians, I'm not seeing you as Hamas. Okay, I'm seeing you as a doctor in front of me, as my cousin in front of me that has a connection to this land, and we need to be able to build together moving forward.
I would love to believe this, but the
Okay.
reality doesn't give me a chance to believe what's happening.
Well, the younger generation has still hearts
I'm
that's not
hoping
so
that-
darkened, and we will be able to build something.
See, to say that the younger generation has a heart not so darkened doesn't seem to add up. Like, we're seeing more and more footage from these new documentaries of the newer generation of Israelis spitting on foreigners, spitting on Catholic priests. Like, we saw footage again just last week on one of Tucker Carlson's little mini documentaries that he's done, interviews by them talking about how they're treated there because they're not Jewish, right? We have seen the commentary from the youth of the Israelis talking about how they're scum and they're dogs and they should be all eliminated from Palestine and that we should take it all over and get rid of them. You are seeing that rhetoric increase because they're becoming more hardline because of not only the leadership in Israel being far more right and being far more aggressive about this Israel first and this greater Israel project, but you are an insane person if you don't think there's going to be a retaliatory effect. There may have been generations of Palestinians that had no ill will into their heart from Israeli people. But if you don't think that the slaughter, the persecution, and the absolute just disgrace of treatment to these people by the Israelis has not impacted almost every other Palestinian in that country, you would be an idiot. To not think that there's not going to be a new generation of pure hatred for the Israelis coming up in this region, you're insane. To think that you can pave peace and have an entire population want to be friends with you and believe there's going to be peace by killing 70,000 of them, their friends, their families, their parents, you don't think that you're breeding an absolutely, massive pool of possible future terrorists and people who can be very easily radicalized because, like, hey, your parents died by the Israelis, right? Yep, sure did. And they bombed you in your home when you had nothing to do with it. There was nothing near you. No Hamas, no nothing. They just killed you because you were there. Yep, they did. Okay, well, doesn't that make you feel bad? Don't you want to do something about it? You don't think that this is where terrorism starts? This is the part that I think that this bombing your way to peace thing is insane. And then the US has been a huge perpetrator of this as well. But now Israel is going down the same road. All you are going to create is more October 7s, right? Because even if there is some form of like higher level of peace, there are going to be some radical extremists created as a result of all of this that is going to commit atrocities in the future because of some revenge quest, because in their mind, they are the John Wick of that story. And not only did they kill their dog, they killed their entire family. They killed their grandparents. They killed their next door neighbors. And they did it with glee. And they belittled them as human beings. They laughed as they were second-class citizens. Or your home that's been there for generations. They walk in, these settlers, and go, you don't live here anymore. With a gun put on your face and say, get out. You don't think that's going to create a whole new generation of terrorists, of people who hate you, who want you to die? There's no way that that's not going to happen. And to say that this younger generation has peace in their hearts, both sides of this conflict, the retaliatory effects or the retaliatory strikes, or in this case, the offensive strikes on October 7th, that's going to create more hardline young Israelis as well because of this perpetuated conflict. You cannot bomb your way to a lasting peace, especially when the people who are on the other side right now are very experienced for now decades guerrilla warfare fighters. They don't need a lot of them to inflict maximum harm. So I don't think that this is true. I don't think that there is, from the evidence, and I'd love to be wrong, a younger generation that is fighting for this. Internationally, that seems to be true. I think internationally, you are seeing people more invested and more aware of what's been happening in these nation states because of the last 3 years than any other period in history, right? Because we've been forced to pay attention to it because of social media, because we have the ability to see what's really going on. We're not getting this, second, third, fourth word filtered down. That's something that's palatable to the masses to fit the interest of a particular nation state. It is getting the truth. We're seeing what's happened. You get to make up your mind about who is right and who is wrong for your opinion. But I don't think this is a path to peace.
Better,
that as
and then
well.
Okay, we have to
able-
pause here. You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Well, I thought he was going to walk away with no handshake then.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. So, I'm actually half Lebanese, and you probably can't tell. The reason is because my mom's from Taiwan, which explains why I look like Bruce Lee's gay son, but that's neither here nor there. The first time I was exposed to what Israel was capable of was the summer of 2006, the 33-day war in Lebanon. There was a firefight that took place between the southern border and northern border of Israel, Lebanon. Hezbollah snuck it over. They killed 8 IDF soldiers, kidnapped 2 of them, hoping that they would get 4 Lebanese prisoners in return. And how did Israel respond? They decided to blanketly carpet bomb the airport, highways, block the port, civilian infrastructure. One of those was my aunt's home. She's not a Hezbollah member. She doesn't live in a military base. And I also remember at that time, my cousins were vacationing in Lebanon, and they told me horror stories about how they were trapped in a basement as hellfire's raining on them. There was no electricity.
During the guy on the left's going to say, well, what about now when we're hiding in our basements every day in Tel Aviv?
Because Israel had bombed the power stations there. They had little water and fuel because Israel had shut off the water and fuel supply. Does this sound familiar?
Sounds like
and not
war crimes.
only that, they had a friend of theirs whose grandmother was being transported from the south to the north in an ambulance, a marked ambulance with the sirens blaring off to escape the bombing that was going on in the south. And it got blown up, it got attacked. The IDF denied that it happened. So in that war birthed what's known as the Dahia Doctrine.
There's been a lot of those where they've denied it at the time, overwhelming international proof has come out, and they've been forced to deny it. Like even in the last couple of weeks when we saw some of those images of the defacement of the of the Jesus statue in Lebanon, where they've come down, they've ripped it down off the cross, smashing it to pieces with a sledgehammer. The IDF came out, right, and the Israeli government came out and said, if you are suggesting that this is a real image, you're anti-Semitic for spreading propaganda, only to have overwhelming proof provided that that was real and it happened, that then forced Israel to put on a show and say, we're going to find the guy that did this and we're going to make him pay. Even though I doubt we see any evidence that they actually come down on this guy. You know, probably a small fine and a slap on the wrist of not for actually doing what he did, but because he got caught and it made an international scandal of reinforcing this new perception that where Israel goes in Gaza or in Lebanon, they are flattening it deliberately, right? Because everywhere could be a place where an enemy lives. We need to destroy it, even though it's very clear that it's on its way to being a land grab. You know, with southern Lebanon, very obviously up into the river, wanting to be confiscated long term. The fact that we're in a ceasefire right now and they're still occupying that territory, pretty good sign that they want it.
And even the IDF general at the time, Eisenkot, had said, we will apply destructive force and it doesn't matter. Everything a civilian village is a military base. And this is what we're seeing today in Gaza is the Dahia Doctrine on steroids. And there is intent to push them out. There wasn't genocide in Gaza because they weren't trying to push out the Lebanese out of Lebanon, but they are doing that in Palestine.
Okay. So even though this is not a conversation about Lebanon, we can talk about that as well because it's obviously related to Israel. And the PLO were very much so involved during that war, and along with Hezbollah and a lot of different issues that was happening on Lebanon. If you want to go into a country that you're about to go to war with, because Hezbollah is constantly shooting rockets onto Israel, attacking Israeli civilians, killing Israelis, so is the PLO with a lot of terrorism. Hold up.
What year?
If they're doing that at that time, okay, then the first thing you need to do is to remove the transportation capabilities of the other army, to remove the airports in order to be able.
See, this is crazy because they've admitted it before that so much of this infrastructure, right, is civilian, because they're saying that's where all of the Hamas and Hezbollah are hiding, right? So we have to bomb that because they're using these roads to get around, that they're using these hospitals to treat their soldiers, that they're getting power from these places to power their bases, right? Even though there's very little evidence that that's true. Like the civilian bridge that just blew up in Iran was a purely civilian infrastructure. In fact, it wasn't even officially open yet. So there was no proof that it was being moved to move any troops. As one example, again, I know this is Palestine and now Lebanon specifically, but they have deliberately targeted things where in Lebanon, they're saying they're blowing up these roads to stop, you know, being able to have the transport of Lebanese military troops when the Lebanese military is actually against Hezbollah. They've committed themselves to that cause for the first time in a long time very recently. And then Hezbollah is traditionally up in the mountain areas where they're firing missiles. They don't have, tank battalions that are using this to transport large amounts of hardware. It's just not happening. This excuse that we have to get rid of all the civilian infrastructure is just, a cover. And I'm sure, again, right? In fact, we saw when there was an attack on a power station by Iran in response to Israel hitting their power stations, right? When they nearly hit one of their nuclear facilities, not in Tel Aviv, but one of the towns a little bit further south, they immediately came out and said, this is a war crime. You're targeting civilian infrastructure, even though that that particular facility was obviously powering a military base nearby. So there's a hypocrisy here that drives me crazy, right? To say that anything, because Hezbollah exists or because Hamas exists, everything is a relevant target, should justify, by his reasoning, every civilian building in Tel Aviv, in Israel, should be fair game. But that's the argument you're kind of making. You don't get to have it both ways.
Able to take out Hezbollah and to end the war. What you're all saying of the horrible stuff that happened, that I'm sorry you had any family member that passed away. Palestinians are my close cousins, but other Arabs are also my cousins. We both descend from Ibrahim, from Ishmael and Yitzhak, so we're all family in this region, and it's horrible what happens to war. The conversation we need to have now is what can we do to remove that and to stop us from happening? Because
it's very simple. Leave the West Bank, go back to the old borders, and have the peace declaration. Because if you create the Palestinian state and you allow them to have a military and you allow them to have a power structure, right, there is immense pressure at that point on Hezbollah and Hamas by the international community. I mean, even multiple heads of state for the Gulf nations have said this over and over again. If you allow the creation of that state, we will guarantee ourselves Israel's safety. We will make sure that no organization, whether it be Hamas or Hezbollah, has the ability to come down and attack Israel. Because what we're saying is you need to end the persecution of the Arabs inside Israel and Palestine. And if you do that, we can have peace. Now, the problem is the Israelis don't trust them, and I can understand that. There's been a complex history where they have been attacked by Egypt, by Syria, by different nations in the past, especially early on after their creation. I can understand their distrust. But they don't want this. They've openly said that they will never allow a Palestinian military. They want it to be completely disarmed, and that's the only way that they'll feel safe. But then there's no way that that nation can develop under the shadow of Israel, knowing what it has done to them, right? There's no way they're going to trust that. And if you really want peace to have the chance to succeed, you have to allow that chance to happen. Now, is it easy? No. All right. If it was, someone would have done it 1,000 times earlier, 1,000 months earlier. But unfortunately, we're not there. And it's not even on the table. It's not even a talking point. It is absolute surrender and the abolishment of anyone who is against Israel and their ability to thrive or exist. They must be eliminated. That is the modern approach, right? The two-state solution has been on the table since the original Oslo Accords. We're just not going to get there.
You can stop collectively punishing the civilian population.
You said you,
Okay,
I'm not you.
pause here. Their flags are up. You've been voted out by the majority.
Yeah, he made that
Please
argument
return to your seat.
way too personal, and he made it about Lebanon. So I'm in.
How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Not bad. I want to talk about your claim, which is that Israel's not committing a genocide in Gaza. Earlier, during
No one's hitting him on
debaters, you
apartheid
said
yet,
that
by the way.
definition of genocide was to eliminate a population. Is that still your definition?
Correct.
Okay, so you recognize that that is not the definition of genocide.
That is mostly the definition of genocide.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you want to know what the full definition of
Go
genocide
for it.
is?
And you're going to say
It's the-
intent, right?
Yeah, of course, that's
Okay,
part
so-
of it.
so
But that's
exactly.
not the qualm I have. It's the intent to destroy a population in whole or in
Or in
part.
part, yeah.
Okay, so you use the evidence of Israel not killing more Palestinians as evidence that it's not a genocide.
Not only that, they call themselves moral and just. With our military might and those nukes that we definitely don't have, but we do have, we could have killed them all. But we're amazing because we didn't.
But the Germans didn't kill every Jewish person. You agree that there was a genocide against the Jewish
The
people in Nazi
intent of
Germany,
Israel was
right?
not to kill in parts the Palestinians
Okay.
either. That is why it's not a genocide. Not
what
in
ev-
I mean, factually untrue. Of course they intended to kill them.
whole or in
evidence-
part.
And okay, what?
Every action that Israel does is to prevent
Let
civilian
me just ask you a
casualties
question,
from being
okay?
killed.
How do you adjudicate whether
Every action they take is to prevent civilians being killed? No, because you know how you can guarantee that? Don't fire the missile, right? We saw the incredible, this is why, again, I can further prove my claim here. The absolutely stellar performance of Mossad with the pager strike, right? With how meticulously that was planned to take out individuals. Now, there were still civilian casualties, don't get me wrong, but that was an example of a tactic that they can use that would limit civilian casualties. Not eliminate it, but severely limit. But they've chosen to blanket, carpet bomb, and bulldoze and demolish instead, right? When they've obviously got the intel and they've got the manpower where they could do this. Now, they could also go in with ground troops, but they don't want to do that because of the threat to themselves. So to say that they're doing everything they can to limit civilian deaths is not true. What they're doing is taking actions to limit Israeli casualties while doing that. That's an understandable military approach. It is. To say that, well, we don't want to put ground troops there because then we would put our soldiers and Israeli people in harm's way as a result of doing that. But you would do that if you were trying to limit civilian casualties. You would say, go in, make sure it's Hamas, then take them out, protect civilians along the way, get them out of harm's way because Hamas is doing the wrong thing. If you were doing that, you would have the world's respect for trying to clear out people who are, by definition, terrorists, of course. But that's not what's happening, right? Now, I don't blame the Israeli military for not putting the ground troops in that way, but to say that they're not deliberately killing civilians by making that tactical decision, which is a horrendous thing to do, in my opinion, is just not honest. It's just not.
A government intends to eliminate in part or in whole a population.
Right. So if every time that there's an attack against a Hamas site, not against a civilian area that doesn't have Hamas, but specifically a Hamas site that is shooting rockets onto Israeli civilians, and Israel does everything to warn the population there to leave by phone calls, by text messages, by leaflets, sometimes sent 72 hours before, we can see the intent here is to minimize civilian casualties.
No, it's not. Because if they were doing that, they would try and, figure out a way to actually help them get out. Because if this was a true, think about it really, if this was a true civilian capture operation, where basically they are saying we're using these human shields and they're not allowing them to leave, they're going to bomb it anyway. Like, I haven't seen one discussion of a time it's like, well, we wanted to hit this target. There was one guy, one general, but it wasn't worth the cost because it was going to kill 120 civilians. They know the population is there. They know they don't have the ability to cover that kind of distance to get far enough away to safe areas. They know this, right? They absolutely know this. And this whole argument of we're the most moral army in the world because no one does this, right? They might put out a warning, but their intent is to bomb that area whether there are civilians there or not. If they, behind the scenes, right, or somehow communicated and showed the world that if they found by a follow-up image that there were civilians still there and they canceled the strike, then I would believe you. Then it's a moral action. All this is a show, right? It is exactly the same thing, right? I know he said not to bring Western examples into this, but it's exactly the same thing that's being proposed by the Americans right now under Trump, saying that if you don't do everything I want, I'm going to bomb your entire civilization into non-existence. I'm going to blow up your power plants. I'm going to take out your water. I'm going to commit horrendous acts because you won't cooperate, right? They're saying, well, it's their fault. The intent is that he is going to do those things, right? He would do those things. But to say that I won't do it if the civilians are still there and it would cause massive civilian casualties, that would be a moral and just process. But that's not what this is. It is a show. It is bullshit and it is propaganda.
And just to be clear,
so this is an example of what Israel does in order to have civilians die at large or as parts.
I understand. Just to be clear, the reason you're saying that is because if they didn't do this, which by the way, this is it's actually a funny standard that you give to Israel, that if they drop leaflets before bombing somebody, that they are proactive and that they're trying to save civilian life. That's actually required by international law. So it's the bare minimum.
And
I just want to make clear. I just want to make clear.
People before
if
attacking.
they didn't do that,
well,
if they
Iran's
didn't do
been doing
that,
that
you would
too,
say that, well, clearly that's
honest.
intent to kill civilians, right?
Not necessarily, but
yeah, Iran's been doing the same thing in the Gulf states. Does it make them hitting countries and civilian infrastructure for people that haven't actually committed actions against Iran, other than the fact that they were a launch point for the Americans? No. But if you want to be fair, if you want to say that it's a moral and just action to give pre-warning, you got to give the Iranians credit if you're this guy. If you're going to use this argument, they're good boys too, which is so foolish.
Okay, so wait.
No,
so,
hold
so
up.
then
Let
why
me
are you?
answer.
No, because that's
if
this is important.
there's a
because that is-
firefight, okay, and
Go
in the
ahead.
moment there's no ability to send leaflets or warning, and people get killed in the process, then there are situations where not warning doesn't make
Okay.
it a genocide. So here's an example when certain situations. I know that you're college and you're on the media and everything else, but I actually went to war. So there's certain situations that develop live where Hamas pops out of nowhere, starts shooting at IDF soldiers. There's a gunfight. There are people who are civilians who are killed, and that is not a genocide because they didn't warn. That's why not warning doesn't make it a genocide.
That wouldn't be a genocide, but I mean, depending on how you went about that, would be defining of whether it was a right or a wrong action. If you saw one rocketeer at the top of a building and you saw an entire building of 1,000 people across, 20 stories, and you open fire and demolish that entire skyscraper to take out, at this point, what you can establish is only one rocketeer, then yeah, that would be an immoral action. It wouldn't be genocide. He's right by the point he's trying to make. But again, it's this bastardization of the term.
Genocide
This is-
either.
this
If
is
the
not what I'm
intent is to
discussing.
kill people,
That's
then
not what I'm
it is a
discussing.
genocide.
I'm assuming that you're talking about when safe zones are bombed, when refugee camps are bombed, leaflets are
Safe
dropped,
zones were safe
which
before
shows
Hamas
that-
entered, and then they're no longer safe, correct?
Wait, which shows that Israel's not trying to commit a genocide, right? If you made that point that Israel is dropping leaflets, which shows that they're not intending to commit a genocide, supposedly, if they didn't drop leaflets, that would be showing intent to commit a genocide.
False. I just
Then there's-
explained why that's
then
the
there's
case. There are
no-
situations that
then
happen
your point,
live.
Then your point. This is. I don't know how well versed you are in debate. That's called
There's
a
not a good
fallacy of
point this guy's
infallibility.
trying to make.
This
If
is
your
called
point,
projection.
if your position cannot be proven wrong, then it is an illegitimate argument to make.
I've proven
But let me,
how. No,
let me,
you finished that
show you.
point.
No,
you
because this
finished
is
that
important.
point, and I'm
Because
gonna respond.
if
Israel
I will
does
give you
everything that it
examples.
can
I will
to
give you
prevent
examples.
civilian casualties, that is a proof that shows that his intention is not to kill
This is-
Palestinian.
No, it's not, because the missile is the intent. I still don't see how people aren't attacking him on this, right? Would the civilians of that civilization have existed tomorrow if not for the actions of Israel? And did they deliberately bomb that building knowing that there were civilians inside it, even though they warned them they didn't leave? Okay, that's when you make the decision. To say that it's their fault, right? Which would be victim blaming if it was a different, conversation or a different topic in this world. This is where the argument falls apart. I wish people would focus on that more than this whole genocide or the moral goodness of, definition.
Civilians. Do Palestinian civilians get killed?
I'm going to give you an
there?
example.
No,
Let
I'm going
me
to
give you
finish
an
my
example.
point now.
No. You want to finish your
spoke-
point.
Of course
you
I'm
want to
going to
finish your
my
point because you've interrupted me
No,
and you don't
I
want me
let
to
you
say
make your
actual
claim,
truth.
and now I'm going to.
Do you want to hear Al Mawasi as an example of a
we gotta
refugee
pause
camp being
there. We're
bombed
out of
without
time.
I'm not going to
leaflets
be able
being
to respond
dropped?
to your point.
By your own standard.
Hey,
then.
guys.
By your own standard.
By the
We gotta
world
pause.
standards. By the world standards, they're not. My next surrounded claim is that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
If you would like to debate this claim, please get to the
We're gonna
chair
get into
in
the definition
3,
stuff.
2, 1.
I want to be very clear. You can be against the anti-expansionist version of Zionism, and that's not anti-Semitism, right? And again, this is where I'm really concerned that this is going to get out of control. And we're already seeing this in Australia where certain phrases you can't utter at all. You get arrested in this country, even though we have nothing to do with that country, on a daily basis, purely because these definitions have started to get bastardized. And this is where it's getting real dangerous, right? The modern Zionist representatives are not representing what the original definition of Zionism is. And I think, God, I hope someone makes this point. Please, use the force. Someone say it, please. Come on.
All of this is to sow chaos and distract from the focal point. We are opposed to an occupation imposed on the occupied people. If I'm opposed to that occupation,
Stick to the point,
I'm
please.
opposed to the ideology of that occupation, which is Zionism. Therefore, I'm not against the people that supposedly tie themselves to that identity. I'm against said identity. So if I'm against Zionism, it should be very clear I'm against anyone who supports it, whether they're Jewish or not, because you mentioned Christian Zionism. You're obviously
I think I get the point you're trying to make. You're saying I'm kind of against the Zionists, not Zionism. It's a fine line.
opposed to that. So am I, because I'm not about this person or that person. If there was a Muslim Zionist, I would be opposed to them. It's the ideology, not the person. And the actual in my opinion, most Zionists are Christians.
can I respond?
Christian Zionists. Yes, you can go ahead. But all of this is a smokescreen to distract from the focal point.
It's very sad that you have so much pain in your heart and have gone through so much that someone speaking in front of you that actually has compassion and is genuine in front of you have to see it as tactics or that there's an objective or that there's a motive.
Because
isn't.
there is.
Okay, I
Maybe
see
not
you as
from
my
you,
family,
but-
like I've said before.
Which you
These are
said
not just
over and
these are
over
not
and
talk
over and
because
over.
because we need to hear it over and over and over because we're denying it and we're rejecting it, and that exists on both sides. I say it to Israelis all the time. I debate Israeli extremists all the time. We need to be able to
Zionism is
transcend.
extreme in and
Now
of
let me
itself.
explain
It's all
why.
extreme.
Let me
There's no
explain.
this
Let me
extreme.
Yeah, see, this is making the case easy. The more I think about it, right, every time someone just uses the word Zionist in a negative fashion without context, you're just inviting this now. And I think you're sort of falling into this anti-Semitic trap.
That
explain why
explains all
Zionism
extremes.
You're
is a form
anti-Semitic if
of
you say this.
anti-Semitism, right? There are many ways that someone can be against the population, including the Jews. Hitler wanted to kill all of the Jews. Some Nazis wanted to just kick Jews out. Some Nazis wanted to have Jews there, but just give them different rights. There are different ways of being anti the Jewish people. One of the ways of being anti the Jewish people is to be against the idea.
That's also all the ways you can be against the Palestinian people, which provenly the current Zionist movement in power, specifically, are doing.
And the movement of our right to live in our ancestral
Who
homeland.
determines that,
If
right?
Someone, if
Why do you
someone-
have the exception to say, I have a right to do this, I have a right to do that?
is-
Like, where does that exception come from?
What do
Why
mean?
do you have this?
the indigenous argument of any indigenous people's
has
rights
been
to
debunked,
self-determination?
which is part of the
It's
smoke
not debunked.
See, he's not. This is where it's so hard, man. Like the indigenous now, what's the timeline? Because theoretically, if Africa was the cradle of the earth, which is the current understanding or belief idea, unless you're of a religious faith, of course, of where humans came from, that we all started there and then we just, walked and shipped and found different ways around the globe to settle, then theoretically, by our DNA situation, a lot of us would have claims to land in the African, Middle East, part of the world. We just would. But we don't. So how this is defined is kind of crazy. That this whole promise that because it was promised to them 3,000 years ago, because they lived there once before they lost conflicts that forced them to flee their homes, means that they've got the right to be there. Well, in 3,000 years, can the Palestinians do this back to these guys and say, well, this was our former land. We can prove that we lived here. It was televised, you throwing my family out of their house. Does that mean that they have the right to come back in 3,000 years and say it was promised to them as well and show proof that they lived there once? Again, this argument of why we're saying that these guys have a right, God-given, like we're going down the religious rabbit hole here. Like we're saying that, and I don't want to bully anyone's faith. I really don't. But you can't have God come before a jury and say, no, I did promise it to these guys. You can't do that, right? We all have this word of mouth handed down information from thousands of years ago from allegedly deities that said, no, this is going to be yours one day. And that's why they've got the right to be there, or because they physically lived there 3,000 years ago. I mean, in Australia, if that right was applied, then this country would revert back to its indigenous population, right? And there are conversations about that happening in Australia right now. Very complicated, very, very challenging to confront because obviously what we as the colonizers did. But what about the Australians who have now established lives over 200 years and have not wished any ill will and have brought no harm to the indigenous population? Well, what do? Like, we haven't done anything. We were just born here. It's not our fault, right? Yep, we've probably benefited from some of those colonial impacts, of course. But at the same time, like, how do you answer that question? And every country just about on planet Earth has not necessarily, with its current representation, been the owner historically of those lands forever. The amount of wars that have been waged, the amount of powers that have come, been, and gone, right? The Roman Empire, as far as it went, right, over hundreds of years, eventually contracted to now being this tiny little country in Europe. But does that mean that the Italians theoretically could make claim to all those parts because they owned it once? Right? This specialization exemption is another reason why you are seeing this rise in this anti-Israeli sentiment, that they do believe that they have rights that no other nation on earth has.
It's actually been proven. A lot of people even here claim to be Jewish, and you know your ancestors are Jews as well from that land. We come from this civilization, both of us, the Jewish people.
But again, a lot of Jewish people don't necessarily have this DNA, linkage or historically back to them, because obviously a lot of people adopt faiths as they go. Remember that faith is not a genetic trait. It is something that can be adopted, and you can make a choice to be of that faith or to not be of that faith, right? You are choosing to have that faith in something. To say that that faith is enough to give you linkage to a completely different land, this is where it does get kind of absurd. Like, I could wake up tomorrow and say, I'm Jewish now, I'm Israeli, because I have internationally always been a part of that territory, right? It's not necessarily true, right? It's kind of the equivalent of, do I want to say this? It's kind of the same concept as changing your gender, right? Is that it's not necessarily changing what you physically are, but it's changing the idea of what you are by a conscious choice that you want the rest of the world to recognize your conscious decision to make a different choice, right? Because you feel that you are this thing. I feel that I am Jewish, or I believe that I am Jewish. That means I believe that I am Israeli, and now I believe that this is my homeland and I have a right to it. There's a logic train there that a lot of people find hard to follow, me included. And again, why does the Jewish nation of Israel have this right that no other people who have occupied that land in the subsequent or pre-3,000 year period, why do they have their claim on this ignored? Right? This is kind of where you start to make the point for the other side. We are the exception. We are the chosen ones. We are the special ones. No one else deserves these rights except for us.
Are indigenous. That is the civilization you actually descend from, and you opted out by either converting to Christianity or Islam or Arabized over time.
The same way you want me to say you didn't do it, my ancestors, which is not me,
But again, a lot of people have opted in. It's not just an opt out. It's a faith. It's not a DNA. It's not a bloodline. It is a faith. It is a religious choice to be this thing.
Ancestors that I can't speak to.
60%.
Maybe they were Canaanite. Maybe they were this. Maybe they were that. That doesn't matter.
Palestinian ancestry, according to genetic studies that have been done over the decades, shows that they descend from the Jewish population. And in cities like Yatta.
Let's have a look. I'm interested in this. So peer-reviewed studies in Nature, Cell, and the American Journal of Human Genetics found that Palestinians and Jewish populations share genetic ancient Levantine ancestry, showing genetic continuity of the people living in the region during the Bronze and Iron Ages. However, the research does not conclude that Palestinians simply descend from Jews. Rather, both groups trace overlapping roots to earlier populations of the region. I feel like you have to expand the specificity of this, because if you look at a lot of the Jewish nationals that would have come down from Europe, right, a lot of those people would not share this same genetic continuity. In fact, again, I would argue, like, what percentage is this genetic continuity? Like, if you measured that same DNA in me, one of the widest guys in history that's never had anything to do with those two countries, would you find similar DNA and traits to me? Because so much of the world originated and we have these same sort of super ancestors from the region? I don't know. But I also think that a lot of the European Jews who are now in power in Israel would have significantly less of this common ancestry than is being purported. I think if you took it from people who have historic links in the region to Jewish families who have always been in that territory since that 3,000 years ago, or the Palestinians or whoever from that same time frame, yeah, of course you would, because they all grew up together. But to say that all the way around the world that all the Jewish populations do, I feel like there must be a subset here. Maybe I'm wrong. I need to probably go and have a look at this study. But it doesn't make sense to me because, again, it's implying that every Jewish person has a bloodline that traces back to this exact nation, when I think the chances of that being true are far, far, far from zero. Right? The chances of every human being that is Jewish faith has a tie to this land? No. Are the bulk of them? I still have doubts. I'm sure a lot of the ones do that are in that region, Jews from that region, sure. But again, this feels like a subset that we've analyzed.
Yafo, Tzfat, Hebron, Shrem. If you go to East Jerusalem, those population of Palestinians is up to 90 to 80%. Again, like I said earlier, you can find publications.
Well, of course they will, because they're all in the region, right? If your sample size is testing people that are living there now and have there for hundreds or thousands of years, of course they're going to have common DNA to each other.
Like Nature, American Journal of Human Genetics, studies done by Nebel, by Hammer, by Behar. These are very clearly proven that Palestinians descend from there, and so do the Jewish people. If the Jews want to live...
So Great point. So why is it only the Jewish people in the nation of Israel that get to have this land and their special rights? He's just made the point for you. Please
in
hit
their
him with it.
ancestral homeland. That is a form of decolonization
pause
movement.
All
here.
of this is a moot point that
Yeah,
can
you
be
got paused.
debunked with a
Point.
10-second
It's
Google
not a moot
search.
point.
Okay, we got to
Someone
pause there.
distracts
We have
the
to
focus.
pause
Google
there.
it. It
Flags
actually
are
gave all
up.
the sources.
You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
I'd love to do one of these one day. I really would. Would I fold? No idea. But I'd love to be tested.
April 2025, the IOF forces made a complete blockade, no food aid, no shelter, nothing getting in to Gaza. There has been 470 people, mainly women and children, that have died from severe malnourishment, and it's expected to be 10,000 of these people who die from severe
they're
malnourishment.
not
Has been
counted
declared a famine
in the 70,000.
in Gaza.
Yep.
Famine. There has been journalists.
I hate it when people do this. Famine. It's an irritating trait, but anyway, that's
This
beside
is
the
the
point.
highest amount of journalists that we've ever seen die.
That's true too.
270 journalists have been targeted, killed. This is more than we've seen in World War I, World War II, the Civil War.
If I was going to be a real jerk and I was the guy on the left right now, I would just literally ignore her points and just say, sorry, my claim is anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. What's your point about that? Right? And just derail her midstream. He's kind of meeting these guys on their argument. So he's actually being quite generous from that point because he could absolutely shut it down and go, well, technically the thing is that's a very Ben Shapiro kind of thing to do. Charlie Kirk was very adept at this as well, where they would just sort of ignore big points that are harder to argue against and then just bring it back to, okay, you can talk about that all you like, but we're talking about this. So you're just trying to distract from that right now, right? It's a great debate tactic. I'll be curious to see if he allows them to keep doing this and meeting them where they are, because it's a generous debate function if he is.
9/11 wars all combined.
Okay, you made 2 points.
No,
Can
no,
I
no.
address
This is
those 2 points?
these are my points to say
Right.
this is what happens under a Zionist regime.
Okay. So this is what
Right,
happens
okay.
during war. If we look,
No, this is what happens during genocide.
I let you finish.
You starve a population.
I didn't do anything. Okay, don't you?
I'm
you?
sorry. You're-
Okay.
Well, when he says he didn't do anything, that's where I would flip him and just basically say, well, look, I'm sorry. You said before that you were in the IDF and that you were there during some of this. So actually, no, it is you because you are representing and you are firing bullets and possibly missiles and grenades on behalf of what she is calling the Zionist regime. So look, I'm sorry, friend, you don't get to have it both ways, right? You said that you are a soldier of the IDF. You fought against Hamas and some of these there at the time. You were there. So I am saying you. That's what I would have done if I was her right now.
The Israeli
we can talk
government.
about the Israeli government.
Sure.
Right now, it's me and you as human beings that are talking about the situation.
but
right?
you support it.
No, I don't support people being starved and people dying and
But you're
people
supporting the
suffering.
regime.
I understand why things are happening, and I'm trying to focus on that in order to change it from happening so that people don't die anymore. Not just
Mm-hmm.
using selecting instances of Palestinian suffering when it fits an agenda in order to manipulate that.
Selective starvation?
No, are you
473
talking about the thousands of
children
Palestinians that died in the Syrian civil war, by the hundreds of
I'm
thousands
talking
of
about the
refugee
people that are in
camps?
Gaza
And
right now
of course,
that are
only-
not
only
having. They are living in
Palestinians-
tents.
Only
they're
only
dying
Palestinians
from
when it
being
comes to
freezed
Israel do
out
like
and
to talk
having
about
no-
them.
No, I mean, I think it's an unfair argument. This has been coming up a lot that people sort of say, people have been doing horrible shit all over the world. Why is it only an issue when we do it? Right? It's like, it's an interesting argument. And then this is sort of becoming one of the parts of the anti-Semitic defense where they're using the one in Iran right now where they're saying 40,000 civilians are killed by them. No one's criticizing them. Actually, everyone is kind of criticizing them because them killing civilians, especially if it's in that volume, which again, we don't have the proof. If they killed 30 to 40,000 civilians in a 2-3 month period, that is horrendous and should be condemned and is a war crime. Well, actually, technically not a war crime, but it is a continued suppression and occupation of its own people. And, it's a 2-tiered state. Exactly the same kind of shit that they're doing by allowing a death penalty, right? So the thing that they're kind of against there, now they're bringing it in that you can do that against non-Jewish Israelis, right? So this whole argument of, well, why are you not fighting and giving a shit about famine when anyone else is doing it, but you're only doing it when I do it? Man, you are racist. It's a crazy defense, but this is a talking point. Like you see it more and more on some of these debates and Piers Morgan's where they go, no, you're just being racist because you're criticizing me. Where were you criticizing Rwanda? Where were you criticizing this and that? No, you're only doing it because we're the Jews. It's like, Jesus Christ, man. Like what a what a flag to fly.
But
Why
I'm
don't you
talking
talk about
these contexts
other
right
Palestinians that are
now.
suffering as well? Let's
There's
talk about
197 buildings
let's talk about
that are
the
rubble
famine
now.
and the block of aid.
197 buildings
The
have
reason
been-
why aid was blocked, which I'm not for,
Let's
is
hear it.
because Hamas was stealing all of that food.
No.
Yes, yes,
The
yes.
nope.
Hamas was stealing that food, killing other
So
Palestinians.
don't you think you should
and that
let
food was
more
going.
food in
No,
instead of blocking
what
it? Where's the
what
logic
I think
there?
should have been done. Here's a legitimate.
Yeah, or if you were really the moral army and you really cared about those civilians, right? Because they were there, remember that. They were there at this point with their ground forces. They could have escorted the food. But they didn't want to because it wasn't worth risking IDF soldiers for his Palestinian lives. If that was true, that Hamas was stealing the food, which there's very minimal evidence to suggest there was, right? It was more, there is evidence there that there was IDF snipers, and not just the IDF, by the way. There was these crazy mercenary groups that you can literally hear some yeehaws from some American in one of the videos that was shared of them picking off people who were running to try and get the food off this very elevated platform, and they were taking shots at them when they were trying to get it, right? So there was these American mercenaries, well, actually international, but the only voices you heard in that video were Americans. So, yeah, again, this lady is not making the best argument. She's got the right idea. She started off very strong by introducing that concept, but now is kind of falling into this guy's trap.
Criticism.
More
Israel
food
created a
should be
safe
let in.
zone.
You know
what
what?
Israel could have done
Doctors
is to
said-
remove.
That safe zone was an absolute kill box trap. There's been so many experts that have talked about that. And again, the charity that set all of that up was basically run by the IDF. Like, feel free to have a Google of that one.
the
that people
population
would come
from
in
where Hamas
when they'd
is.
come out from the food aid, they'd all be shot in the same place on the same day. The one day people would come in with a shot in their arm, everybody,
The
because it
videos
was
that
a,
I know what she's quoting, actually. These doctors talking about when they set up these food camps, that they were like taking these shots. It'd be like left arm, left leg, right leg. And then, you know, there was genitals being shot on children as well, according to some of these just really, really, really upsetting interviews with a lot of the medical professionals that were volunteering there, especially out of the UK. And you hear those stories and just go, oh my God, you know. So again, I know what she's referencing here, but when you just kind of throw that out there without context for the room, you do run a risk.
Have
Okay,
is
we
of
have to
Hamas
pause.
shooting
No,
Palestinians
pause.
trying to get
okay.
aid.
Pause.
It's the
There are
ISIS
plenty of
backed
videos
gangs
that are happening.
that
You have the
Netanyahu
right
has already
idea.
agreed
The
to.
flags are up. You've been voted out.
But then just execution, not great.
Well, I think criticizing a regime is not criticizing identity. That was a point that was already brought up. But I have a question for you.
Why does this guy kind of look like Charlie Kirk in hiding? Is it just me that sees this? It's like if I saw even like a little bit of the style when he sat down, a little bit of look. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into this. Maybe I need to see a more recent photo towards the end of Charlie Kirk. But I don't know. There's a vibe this guy has already. Anyway, ignore me.
Do you agree with the current strategy with the Board of Peace in order to bring stability to the Gaza region?
I don't.
And what
I-
are some
I-
of the criticisms that you have of that plan?
So first of all, I completely agree with you that criticizing a regime is not anti-Semitic. Like I said earlier, I don't.
Hey, okay, we're done. Let's move on to the next point. Please
No,
clip
one
that.
Israeli that doesn't criticize the Israeli government, that's not anti-Semitism. That's not anti-Zionism either. When you're against the right for the Jewish people to live there, that's when it becomes anti-Semitic. Now, when it comes to the Board of Peace and Trump's policies and trying to create the French Riviera in Gaza and all these things, we are on the same page that this is horrible. There should
Okay,
be no
good man.
imposition of the United States, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, or any foreign entity coming into this land. This is the land of the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Or the Israelis doing that same thing. So he's not against the Riviera. He's just against against America doing it. If we want to turn this into a luxury resort where you can come and bang a hooker on your balcony, we have the God-given right because we were promised 3,000 years ago that you could bang that hooker on that new Riviera that we provide. But if Donald Trump builds it, then it is wrong, right? I was with him right up until that pivot of, now this is our land, everyone else can get fucked. He was so close.
We have to create one civilization for both where we have equality in this land.
And so it's a democratic state, a one-state solution.
Yes, one civilization I call, because one state
you don't-
implies
you don't
the
believe-
current political system, which
You don't
is
believe
flawed.
that Jewish or there needs to be a Jewish identity that's central to the governance
Of course I do.
of Israel.
course
So
I do.
how could it be a democratic regime if everybody
Yeah,
has
good
autonomy and equal rights, if one ethnicity is prioritized over all
Great
others?
question. This is an honest conversation. I'm happy we're having it. So first of all, there are non-negotiables for the Jews and non-negotiables for the Palestinians. For the Palestinians, it's the right of return and freedom from the river to the sea. That creates a problem to today's Jewish non-negotiables, which are full economic, political, and military control over the land.
See, again, it's not equal rights, right? If the Jewish faith are allowed to be armed and the Palestinians are not, then, or the Arabs, okay, because there wouldn't be Palestinians at that point. If this was all one centralized Israel, then it'd be a two-tiered system. That's kind of the point the guy on the right is trying to make.
Jerusalem is the capital and the third temple is built. Now, how are you going to have these two things that are
Now, the third temple is interesting because as a guy who read the Bible quite a bit, because I was raised Christian, I did the after-school care, I got into the faith, read the book a bunch of times, but I also grew up in a part of Australia where really bad shit was done in the name of Christianity and then covered up to people in our town that it impacted for generations, right? Besides any of the points here. I've actually forgotten my point now because I just remembered something terrible, but let's get back to this.
Well, the idea of Palestinians returning to the land makes a demographic problem and a cultural problem. Today, a lot of Palestinians hate Israelis. They wouldn't want to live in Israel.
That is such an
Yeah, but again, you're creating a two-tiered system, right? Because they're not allowed to have the same rights as the other people. Not allowed to have arms, not allowed to have the same voting rights. That's not equal. And that's kind of the point he's making.
I have to stop
A
you
lot
there.
of How do you have
just
peace
to say to the camera, what this is advocating for is an ethno-state that prioritizes one particular population over those that
now you're
already
putting
have
words
regime
into
there.
people's
No,
hands.
that is
I did not say that there were priorities of individuals. There's a collective that are indigenous to the land. It will be.
We'll let you continue.
Yes, let me finish.
I'll actually give the truth to the camera as soon as you're done with this bullshit.
There's 16 million people, Jews in the world, right? Those are the descendants of 2.5 tribes. They're
Again, not necessarily. Because religion is not a people. It's just not necessarily that straightforward.
9.5 tribes that are missing as a part of that number. We were 12 tribes once upon a time. That population today that still identifies as a part of the Jewish people are 100 million outside of the 16 million. And half of them want to make Aliyah to move to Israel. So we would have 50 million Jews coming back to the land of Israel. Palestinians also returning. A lot of things have to happen before that day happens, where we change the culture. We create freedom of speech, which does not exist in Palestinian societies. We change the structure.
The freedom of speech doesn't exist in the Israeli society. Like, you are not allowed to express certain views about Israel inside Israel. You are not allowed to report about what is actually happening in Israel right now in Israel, right? It's not a free speech place. Like, they are heavily editing it and they are making laws that are severely punishable, different tiers of punishment depending on who you are, of course. So I wouldn't say it's free speech and it's the Palestinians persecuting that more. Now, they're definitely not free in the same level of definition, because obviously we look at the extreme versions of parts of the Muslim faith, like in Iran, where if you are not saying things that are per the faith and against Sharia law, that, you know, the consequences are severe and could be even death. That's a horrible thing to happen. There's a kernel of truth in what this man is saying, but I think that they're not necessarily completely exempt from that on the Israeli side either.
Education, and once we have something that we can both live together, we can have our aspirations together.
It is just.
Now, are you Palestinian?
Can I continue?
I'm just asking one question. I want to understand who
I'm not
to.
Palestinian, no, and I don't believe that identity gives credibility to those
No,
arguments.
it shows
I
if
think
someone's speaking as a fan or as a player.
No, whoa, a fan
or a player. Are you
You don't get to talk about it if you're not one of us. I get it.
pro-Palestinian or are you Palestinian?
I don't think that we should view this as a fucking sports game, dude.
I'm sorry to curse again.
I'm sorry to curse.
It's not a sports game.
I can recognize an atrocity when I see it because I believe what my eyes are
October
telling
7th
me.
an atrocity?
I believe that any innocent life that has died is something
October 7th an atrocity?
Any innocent life that dies needs to be condemnable.
So much for recognizing atrocities.
I just said any innocent life that dies.
This strategy also pisses me off, right? Every time something starts going to persecution and death and innocent casualty, well, what about October 7th? Horrendous, horrible, should never have happened, wish it didn't, right? The deaths of civilians is always wrong. But it's wrong when it was 1,200 people total. And again, around 800 of them being civilians. So is that mean that it's 7 times more wrong, right? 7 point something times more wrong when you do it on the scale of 70,000 people? Fuck yeah, it is, right? To sit there and say, well, October 7 means that if you believe that that was tolerable because it was a retaliatory action in the long history of these two countries, or it's an offensive attack if you limit your scope of, well, when did this start and who fired first, right? This is an 80-year-old conversation, really, of Han versus Greedo. Who shot first, right? It depends on your measuring window, right? The first shots weren't fired until Israel became a state. The first shots are fired when people were demanded to leave forcibly from their homes. That's when may not have been shots, but then shots came from that. back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it's going to keep going this way until we get to some kind of a situation where either these guys are completely eliminated, which is obviously what it seems like the new modern Zionist movement is trying to push toward with their strategy and their actions. They might not be saying it. Some of them are, right? You got Ben Gvir and some of these guys out there. Sorry, not Ben Gvir. You got the prime minister and former prime ministers going out there and saying these things. It's insane. Absolutely insane. Or they come to a two-state solution where everyone does have a right to have representation on their indigenous lands and being able to represent their faith equally and with the same levels of freedom.
It needs to
was
be
an
condemnable.
atrocity.
All I'm saying is it is an insane point.
Just say
to
it was an atrocity.
That being
Concede that point. It's
anti-Zionism means you're
okay.
anti-Semitic because you're spitting in the face of Jewish voices for Palestine. You're spitting in the face of Jewish voices for peace. All of these are people that recognize their identity as Jewish people that can also call out atrocities when they see it, because they don't believe that just because they have a shared ethnicity means they need to endorse an ethno-state that is brutally killing people indiscriminately. They can recognize when they see something that is a human rights failure and advocate against that. What I want to make clear real quick, and I'll let you speak.
But
I will conclude.
and I'll let you respond after to your next claim. Okay, there are populations within all peoples that turn against their own. There are individual.
Oh, Jesus Christ. That, turn against their own is that to criticize the actions of the modern Israeli Zionist movement, right, is to turn on your own people. You're betrayers, you're traitors. We see this language. Even they're doing it to themselves now. Like, it's not just the rest of us we're anti-Semitic. They're going to call Jewish people anti-Semitic now? It's actually a good point, right? If you say anti-Zionist things as someone of Jewish faith, are you now anti-Semitic? Are all these groups that this guy on the right just mentioned, are they all Jewish people who hate Jews? That doesn't track. That doesn't work out.
Palestinians, let me finish. Yes,
are turning against their own.
They are tokens who side with their oppressors in order to try to be accepted in the modern world.
How is Palestinians oppressing Israelis when Israel's controlling the region?
They side with the world that hates the Jewish people and hates Israel and are attacking.
Israel
and in order
is
to be
the
accepted,
only military in the Middle East that is backed by the most powerful regime in the entire world. So what are you talking about?
They're supporting also Egypt and they're supporting other places because the intent of the United States is to create conflict in that region and to profit so that you and your country can go and profit over here because that money goes straight to U.S. weapon companies, which I'm against.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some truth there, but to blame America for stoking all of this, I mean, it definitely looks like it's either a two-way street at a minimum, right, where one is pushing the other and the other one's pushing the other to both benefit. I mean, obviously at the moment, the U.S. is going for an immediate benefit from, actually, sorry, you have to separate things here. What he's saying is technically true, and in a way, American companies that are involved in weapons manufacturing will absolutely benefit. The oil companies who are making money from incredibly inflated oil or, diverting the Middle East oil to now, trying to buy it from America, which is Trump's big push at the moment, those companies will stand to profit significantly, right? And anyone who is playing the stock game on these companies as well stands to benefit. But the American people are about to eat a huge amount of shit, just like the rest of us are, as the real cost of these barrels of oil and the lack of petrochemical base, like, things that make plastics. I just read there's going to be a condom shortage soon because they're running out of the required materials to be able to make new prophylactics, which basically means what? We're all going to, sorry, babe, I would have loved to glove up tonight, but, the war in Iran means they're going to have to go in raw. It's going to affect everything in a negative way. So he's not wrong, though, that obviously the people in power and the elites and those linked to capital corporations that profit from war and conflict are absolutely going to make a shit ton of money, while the Americans themselves, no. But again, the main country that stands to benefit the most from a weakened greater Middle East region is obviously Israel. Right? They do stand to gain the most because they can prosper as long as they have the backing of the Americans, they can continue to build. And to say that he's against Americans' facilitation of this because they're doing it for their own ends denies the fact that Israel will benefit from those ends.
We have to pause. We've got flags up. Can you return to your seat?
They had some good ideas there, but again, they're letting this guy play a little bit too strongly.
So I want to do something. I want to start with good faith, okay? This issue gets all of us heated. I can recognize that, myself included. So I'm not trying to do a gotcha. I'm not trying to be offensive. I want to first recognize that you are someone who is separate from the, precondition of Israeli rhetoric of never, ever recognizing Palestinian identity or existence. I think you're doing it in a strategic way, but I want to recognize that you have moved the bar a little bit. So that's commendable to an extent. But you fail to recognize the pain that's not in front of your face. You say you see your Palestinian, comrades, your
See, again, I hope she brings it back around to anti-Zionism versus anti-Semitism, because a lot of these guys at the moment are not hitting the point of the debate.
cousins that are sitting here, but not the ones over there. So your claim was
I
anti-Zionism.
see the ones there too.
Okay, anti-Zionism is, I'm going to make my claim. You said anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. But you constantly come back to this idea that people who are anti-Zionist don't want Jews to be in Israel. But that's not what anti-Zionism is.
That's what Zionism.
Well, by definition, it actually is, and that's the trap, right?
I'm not finished with my claim. Anti-Zionism is that Jews should not have supremacy when they are there.
Make that
That's
point
not what
then.
Zionism means.
And when you're discussing anti-Semitism, what I really struggle with, and I want to bring up Peter Beinart. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he is a Jewish scholar, and I really recognize that he is doing something important, which is bringing the voice back to why Jews should be against this in the first place, and why when they're not, it creates conditions of anti-Semitism. I believe your efforts are more anti-Semitic because you're creating a monolith of the Jews. You are saying Jews are never capable of committing such violence.
I mean, there wasn't this level of, there is genuinely anti-Semitic rhetoric out there. On social media, I see a lot of people where you're seeing Israeli supremacist. Maybe we need to start changing Zionism to Israeli supremacist. Maybe that's the safer term to go with. Maybe that's the change we need to make now. Instead of saying I am anti-Zionist, you say I am anti-Israel supremacist. So if you believe that in the old school of Zionism that Israel has the right to have a country of their own where they can exist, thrive, and be free, I'm with you. If you are doing it at the cost of the lives of literally anyone else that doesn't have the same faith, I'm against it. So if you're an Israeli supremacist, then I'm against it. There's a good point to make, I think.
Jews are always the victim. In the book of Esther,
That was the point I was going to make. So the genuine anti-Semitic language that has started to evolve from this worldwide since the beginning of this creation of the genocide in Gaza, after October 7, where we really saw the world start to really turn on the modern Israeli regime, that's when we saw this massive rise in worldwide anti-Semitic language, like true anti-Semitic language, right? As well as now this incidental co-opted, well, now this means anti-Semitic too. But if we go from the general definition of, these people are this or these people are that, that's definitely out there. And it's definitely on the rise because we are seeing the impacts of what's being had, and not just for the Palestinian people themselves, but people have seen what has happened to them with no justice, right? No other country would be allowed to get away with that kind of murder. At least they shouldn't, unless you're the United States, of course, because they make the rules. You shouldn't be allowed to get away with it. There should be justice and accountability, but it's not coming. So I think there's a frustration around the world that's created that. But then again, this supremacy language coming out of the modern Israeli community of saying, well, you can't condemn us for doing it, it's going to piss people off. But I think that you are going to create more anti-Semites, genuine ones out there, by doing what they are doing now, right? And continuing to try and force the world to adapt to its belief structure of this is the way things are going to be. We define language in all of your countries. And now, they're very clearly through lobbyist groups trying to change the laws in other countries. Like they are actively trying to change what is happening in your country, right? They're threatening Spain and Italy. They've changed by petitioning governmental officials here in Australia. We've had new laws created specifically for anti-Semitic language in this country in the last year. Now, the reasons they were created from a horrendous event, and yes, we should have reviewed that and we should have made some changes. But to make these blanket sweeping changes that only benefit one particular group, right, when they could have applied a blanket rule to all hate speech, makes it feel like it's a law above others, that there are people who are protected above others. And that is going to create distrust. That is going to create negative perceptions, right? So I think that the actions of the Israeli leadership and the IDF over the last 3 years are the reason we are here. If you looked at the amount of rhetoric that was anti-Semitic or anti-Israel pre-October 7, would be low. Immediately after October 7, I would argue most of the world would have been on Israel's side, saying this is a terrorist attack that has absolutely no place in this world, the same way the world responded to 9/11. But it is the reaction, the overcorrection of what they have done with this actual genocide, the way they have done it, executed it, and then told the world to go screw themselves if they don't agree with it, and saying that you're a racist or you're anti-religious because you are criticizing those actions, is why we are seeing a genuine rise in anti-Semitism. Not at the scale that I think they are defining it at, but no, there definitely is an increase in genuine anti-Semitic language. But I think it's even more important to separate those two, because if you conflate it all, then if the word anti-Semitism is kind of washed out, then the people who genuinely we should be doing something about are going to thrive, because they're going to snake through and go, oh, the Israelis say everything's anti-Semitic, don't worry about it, Whereas we should be separating that language for the safety of Israelis and the safety of the Jewish people, because otherwise, if you conflate it all together, eventually it's going to be the boy who cried wolf. Like, it really will be. And that's a place I don't think anyone wants to get to.
Book of Esther,
Yes.
when Purim, the celebration of Purim, right? Can we recognize that 75,000 Gentiles were killed by the Jews? The Jews commit that atrocity.
No.
They didn't. So this
No.
wasn't in the Book of Esther. This didn't happen?
No, the Jews did not commit atrocities.
Because Jews are not capable of committing atrocities.
Jewish individuals are capable, of course.
What
but
about
the
a Jewish
collective
collective?
isn't.
So Israel is not a Jewish.
The collective isn't. I mean, it's a nation state that you're saying as our group. So I don't think you can make the separation of the individual versus the collective when this nation state is defined as the collective of these individuals. Like, they are their own unique group that need to be treated separately and differently. I don't know if that
collective.
point
You
holds
just
up.
keep saying that Israel is a Jewish collective. It's not.
Israel is
Well,
the
there you go.
country of the Jewish people.
Okay.
Would it be hypothetically capable of doing something wrong? Absolutely. Has it also done other things wrong? Yes. I'm not talking about that the state is not
Do you
capable of doing things that are
recognize-
wrong.
Do you recognize that when you say every
so you
Israeli
conceded the
criticizes the Israeli government?
Correct. To show
so
that
I
criticism
want
is not anti-Semitism.
to, but here's the issue.
But you're not criticizing, you're
Israel,
demonizing.
In Israel,
How is she demonizing? She's not demonizing. I don't think she's demonizing the collective, but again, she's not being specific enough where he can get away with that point. But again, he just said it himself that criticism is not anti-Semitism. Yeah, okay. I think I get what he's going at now. He's very much locked into if you say you're anti-Zionist, you're anti-Semitic. By the very particular definition, he's right. And we've
Israel.
covered that point
A
already.
Jewish person can say, I don't believe in God. But if you want to be part of the Knesset, you cannot be anti-Zionist. So you can't actually question the
Okay.
system from
Let-
within. You
let's not-
cannot
so-
question.
She just accidentally conflated Zionist and Jewish.
So
structure.
anti-Semitism, there are 3 Ds in order to recognize them when it comes to Israel. If you demonize the Jewish people, if you delegitimize our existence,
every
and if
person
you're
would.
holding a double standard
I'm
to the
making
Jewish
an
people-
assumption. I might
Listen,
be wrong.
I
Every
let
person
you- I
here
let
looks
you-
like.
I mean, so much what the Israelis doing is the double standard. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's fine if we do it, but if any other nation, people, or individual does it, it's evil.
They're
let you
anti-Zionist.
communicate. I
What?
let you communicate. I'm going to address the actual point, which is the claim that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. If you're trying to delegitimize the Jewish people's right and claim to the land and existence, if you're trying to demonize us and make us seem as monsters and take out all context to make it seem as Israel's the worst thing in the world and now connect it to other problems in the world, if you're trying to hold a double standard where you
Right.
care about some
Rudy,
Palestinians
I want
but
to
not all
recognize that.
Palestinians,
I want to.
you are
I said I
an
wasn't gonna
anti-Semite
I
if
wasn't
you are
going to
doing
get
that.
passionate. I did, so I'll
Okay,
apologize
so-
for that.
so now
I'll come
when it
back.
comes to
I
someone-
want to address that.
so
Don't move forward. I want to
No,
address
I'm not
it.
moving forward. I'm finishing the point. Zionism is the idea. This is why definitions are important. Zionism comes from the word Zion, which is Jerusalem, and the idea that we have a right to return and self-determine on the
Yeah, I think I'm definitely going to change my language. This guy's kind of made me look at more the term anti-Zionist, and a lot of people are declaring themselves that way. And I think that I probably would have not defined myself that way, but I certainly thought it would have been anti-Zionist action. But that is defining the current Zionist as the leadership of the Israeli regime, right? Which I think a lot of people, when they're colloquially using Zionism right now, that's what they're talking about, right? Or you'd be calling it, it's the equivalent of like the Iranian regime rather than the Iranian people. So perhaps we need to lean away if we don't want to fall into this trap where they can excuse their behavior and conflate any criticism as anti-Semitism, maybe we need to go with him here and concede that point that I am not anti-Zionist action, but I'm against the actions being perpetrated by the people who are reportedly leading the Zionist movement, right? Or calling it, like we said, Zionist supremacy rhetoric. I would say that I'm against Zionism in supremacy. Yeah. The wording there we need to work on. But I think I get the point he's trying to make, and I think this is why they're getting away with this conflation argument. They do have a right to have a place to exist the same way the Palestinians do. But we need to figure out a way to talk about this better, where this point gets off the table so we can get to the real issues of the actions, not the words, right? The actions of the current Israeli leadership and their military and some of their people are horrendous. And they are the ones that are advocating for Zionist supremacy.
This ancestral homeland. To be against this idea, to be anti-Zionism, is against the idea that the Jewish people should have a right to self-determine. That is anti-Semitic. Now, if you're against certain policies the government is doing, the treatment of Palestinians, the suffering of Palestinians, that is not anti-Zionism. That is being pro-Palestinian talking. We have to differentiate those points.
Good.
When I'm saying that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, is by defining Zionism. And you know who gets to define Zionism? The Jewish collective, the Jewish people. And if you're going to source me...
See, that is dangerous if they can basically change their definition. And we're seeing this happen in a lot of countries where the definitions of anti-Semitic language is not necessarily being considered by the local governments, but they are being co-opted or forced towards adopting this new definition that's coming out through some of these pro-lobby
individual Jews that you can hold on a handful who, unfortunately, due to the trauma that we face and the generational trauma that has been projected onto our people, then end up siding with an oppressive world that always blames the Jewish people for all problems. That is not a source of reference. There are individual Palestinians who also hate all the Palestinians, and they're not the people I'm going to source to talk for the Palestinian people.
I want to identify something. In your claim, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
Yes.
I'm going to make an assumption that every person around us is an anti-Zionist. Here, can you identify one
Yeah, again, that's fallen right into the trap, right? Because Zionist definition, if you look it up, the guy's right. You need to change this language, man.
Semitic rhetoric that someone has said?
There's delegitimization of our identity, saying, oh, no, it was originally the Canaanites. It wasn't the Jews. You guys aren't the real Jews. You guys are converts. All anti-Semitic points. Then there's demonization. Oh, you guys are monsters and you kill indiscriminately. You carpet bomb. Then there's whole...
But see, again, that is a conflation that now I'm off his team again, right? Because... Again, these are legitimate actions that are being committed by this nation in this nation's name. Does it mean that every Jewish person as part of that faith is on board with this? No, this guy said that he's not. But if you are criticizing the nation state of Israel, who is persecuting these people in this manner, then that is fair criticism. And I don't think you get to call that anti-Semitic because you are not demonizing the people. You are demonizing the people creating those decisions, but not the individuals within society that have nothing to do with it. Not Israeli civilians, just those persecuting and perpetuating these acts. So again, I don't think it's demonizing the entire people. That's a conflation argument.
Holding double standards where you don't care about actual genocides happening in the world. You don't care about Palestinians dying in other cases. You only care about using them when they can be used as Israel. That is called anti-Semitism.
So
again, that is such a crazy point to make, that you only care about them. You only care about these deaths and these executions and these famines when it's the Jews doing it, right? I hate this argument so much because it is such a stretch to say you don't care about anyone else on the planet until now it's us doing it. Now you care. Now that means you're an anti-Semite.
What
that
you have just done
I fucking hate that
is
so much.
Identify all of the things that everyone has done around you.
Anti-Semitic points.
Okay. And you are recognizing that something has been done wrong to you. Can anyone around us say that Rudy is doing something wrong to us? Yes,
sure,
they can.
If I did,
but,
sure.
But they're not putting this label on you that because of that, then all your points fail.
No, I'm not.
You
I'm
have
not
this sense.
condemning the
You have this sense that people are
Yeah,
being
she didn't
anti.
argue that well.
There are points that we agree on.
Flags up. You've been voted out by the majority. Please return.
Man, everyone's so close to like opening the door, but no one wants to kick it down. Oh, the doc's back in.
Let me give it to you. You're a good debater. There is no doubt about that. You've been trained very well
Nobody
to talk
trained me.
about this by yourself. But this is the problem. The problem is that you're trying to give yourself the right to define what's Zionism, and you're not giving us the right to define what do we mean by being anti-Zionists. When we say we're anti-Zionist, we do not present any hatred toward any Jews or any Jewish people or any community. What we're trying to say, we're against what the Israeli government is doing. That's what we mean. So if we're going to try to fight for hours to define what do you mean by Zionism, what do I mean by anti-Zionism, what we're trying to say is that the Israeli government, that you're part of it, part of the IDF, part of the Israeli community, that you're defending what they're doing.
I'm not part
We
of that.
are completely
Do you know what? There's a point to be made there, isn't there? It is kind of hard to separate most of the Israelis, if you really think about it, from these conflicts because it is mandatory service in Israel, right? You have to serve. So you are a part of that machine more than perhaps other nations would be. So again, you can't conflate everything to say, well, look, just because you were a member of the IDF, that means you were prone to genocide or that you wanted to execute Palestinians. No. But it is harder, if we are honest about it, if we're thinking about it from that perspective, it is harder to separate the average civilian in Israel because a very significant portion of them, from my understanding, have served in that military, right? Maybe not by choice, but if you want to live there, that's what you have to do.
against what this government is doing. You're trying to defend what they're doing in Gaza. You're trying
I'm
to
not trying to
justify and give excuses. That's outrageous for us. We don't accept that.
So, Doctor, you did something that's very important that I think that we can transcend the conversation is by understanding what we're saying rather than terms. The reason why I'm saying that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism is because I'm giving a very specific definition of Zionism,
Very
which is
narrow.
the official definition, and the definition that historically was and currently is that the Jewish people
So that's not what we mean.
Exactly. This is why we need to have a conversation of what do you truly mean. When I say I'm a Zionist, I'm not talking about suffering of Palestinians. I want Palestinians to be able to return. I want Palestinians
your
to be able to
actions
live.
are louder than
my
your words.
actions are actually working to that. I work with Palestinian leaders in Gaza and in the West Bank to actually change the situation.
You are
My
blaming
actions-
Palestinians for what's happening in Gaza.
I'm not blaming Palestinians
You-
for what's
you
happening.
just
in Gaza.
said that.
I actually
The reason-
blamed the U.S. government for their foreign aid. I blame the British for what they
Now,
did into our country.
do you-
And I would like to
So you blame the US for their foreign aid? What, as in funding Israel? Or is it about like propping up Palestinian people who without that aid probably would have died? I guess I'm confused by that point. But God, I hope
see
someone
us
asks
being
him.
able to transcend. But what you are doing is so important because everyone who's listening can realize we need to understand what we're actually saying. If you're
So-
condemning the suffering of Palestinians, that is not being anti-Zionist. And if
Good.
you're miscommunicating that and Israelis are hearing you saying I'm an anti-Zionist, let's ask you what you truly mean by that. And if we mean different things, then let's put those words to the side and actually care about what we mean. What is a future vision that we can live together in this land that includes both of us?
What the Israeli government is trying to do right now is to push for criminalizing any criticism of the state of Israel.
Correct.
Any
That's not
criticism,
true.
any criticism of
I
the
don't know
government
one
of
Israeli
Israel.
that doesn't criticize the Israeli government.
But Americans are not having that right. See, Americans nowadays are realizing what the Middle Easterns and the Palestinians have been dealing with for the past 75 years.
which
You
is?
know, which is the reason there are dictatorships in the Middle East is to protect the state of Israel. Whether you believe it or not,
So
that's what
that's
people.
why there's
That's what
dictatorship,
people
all to
believe.
support the-
You know,
So there was
you
no
know,
dictatorships before the state of Israel?
You know who's second receiving of American and U.S. aid after Israel?
Egypt.
Egypt. Why is that? You know why the Sisi is put in place? Why is that? That's what the people of the Middle East believe.
Well, we're gonna agree
now,
on that.
Now Americans are coming to realize, hold on. You're attacking my freedom of speech. You know how many people lost their
here in
job,
Australia too.
lost their school or education because they're criticizing the actions of the government of Israel?
There's absolutely freedom of speech in Israel. Okay, whether you're Palestinian or Israeli.
Yeah,
Again, there's a lot of evidence that that's not true, that it's selectively you can. And I will say that like the press of Israel have been surprisingly transparent. Like I've been reading more and more Jewish publications, more Israeli publications from inside Israel. You'd be shocked how honest some of that reporting is going out towards things like Iran or even the Palestine genocide. They are reporting on the facts more often than you'd think. There is nowhere near as much editing and watering down that you see in like a lot of Western media where everything is like heavily tilted towards a left or a right lean, where you have the extreme left and you know, MSNBCs, etc., going through to say that, you know, every Palestinian that dies is a martyr versus the other side of, you know, Fox, where it's just like, oh, they're all evil terrorists, you know, and everything in between. I will say that the press in Israel doesn't seem to be as heavily persecuted for the most part than you see in some of these other nations where they are heavily editing what can and can't get out. Except for now, obviously, this new independent media. except we do see obviously specific topics. Like you can't report on the war right now. International journalists, however, there is a huge persecution within Israel, Palestine, and Lebanon. Like we're obviously seeing the targeting of independent and international media down there. But I will say that I have been genuinely surprised and in some ways impressed with some of the Israeli outlets with their honesty about these are the facts, let's report them, even if it doesn't gel with the narrative from the current leadership.
The right to say what you want.
It's
So
not the
there
same
is
all
freedom.
over. It's
There
not the
is
same all over.
What you're talking about in Gaza, where Hamas doesn't allow people to talk, or in the Palestinian Authority controlled
I'm
areas
talking about
where
here
they
in the
don't allow.
U.S. So we're trying to define what doing by anti-Zionism.
Okay, but I'm not in the U.S., so I'm not here to correct.
No,
And
but we're
I
talking
actually
about
agree
that right
that
now.
we have to remove all military investments and control of the United States and other European countries into the Middle East, because they are the ones who plagued us to be in the conflict.
And Israel too. I mean, I've got no objections to that, of taking out all of that kind of money to the extent. But then again, there are places where you need investment in healthcare. You know, I think if we were taking away military support, absolutely on board. If we're talking about taking away all funding by prosperous nations to investing in the genuine development, and there are, you know, these NGOs can be anything from truly beneficial, benevolent organizations that are trying to increase the livelihood and the healthcare of individuals in these evolving countries. However, we also do see a lot of it is song and dance and there's political influences and there's things behind the scenes. So I don't completely disagree with that statement. I would love to see a lot of foreign meddling go out of this part of the world. But I do think that they do need, from countries that are in a more beneficial situation where they can afford to do so, as long as they've looked after their own people first and there's enough money left over, then yeah, of course, I've got nothing against them sponsoring aid organizations in those countries. But I think that this has to be true for Israel as well. That I think if he's going to say you need to get rid of all that military support and funding and build up for this part of the world, we all know that from the Americans that, you know, Israel is getting very, very significant funding from the American public. You know, they may not be voting for it, but the people that they've represented are sending billions of dollars every year directly in aid, unconditional aid, by the way. Whereas this guy doesn't also understand that sometimes there are strings tied to that aid, that America will say, okay, you're allowed to have this money, but if you commit actions A, B, C, or D, or maybe we want you to stop certain activities if you want to get this money. Like, look at Iran right now. They're saying right now we don't like you and what you stand for, so we're going to sanction the crap out of you. However, if you give away your weaponry and if you do things that we like, we will stop the blockade on your money. So yeah, there are some points to what he's saying I agree with, but I think that has to be universal, and I think that they need to definitely take that money out, and Israel needs to stand on its own 2 feet.
What happened to Rabin when he tried to put that? He was assassinated.
Because he wanted to separate our land, which you would agree that is against that, right? Do you think that we should have 2 states? We shouldn't.
Again, like a lot of that land is not theirs. So, I mean, to say that we should separate and there should be 2 states, the original creation of this new territory was something that was identified as Palestine. You can make your arguments about, well, they never officially registered it or entered statehood or elected a unified whatever. There's truth in some of that. But at the same time, there were 2 different, well-defined nations, Israel and what was Palestine. Everyone recognized that there was a split. So to sit there and say, well, no, it's one and it's ours, and you're asking us to split our country, right, when that country did not exist between the 1940s, right? Make your arguments about 3,000 years ago, all you like. In modern history, that wasn't there. You took that land from someone who was there more recently. If we went by squatters' rights internationally, right, theoretically 10 years in, that place is yours, right? 3,000 years, what's the statute of limitations? Let's be honest.
But the problem is that we always talk about the 2 solutions, one state solution, but most of the Israelis, they're looking for a 3rd solution.
Which is?
Ethnic cleansing.
I don't support
getting
that
everyone
solution.
out of here. That's what they want to do.
And there's a 4th solution where Palestinians also want to ethnically cleanse the Jews. We can talk about extremist opinions on both sides.
But
if you and I,
the majority of
do
the
you,
people
do
who are
you
doing
believe
that.
that there should be one civilization? The reason I don't use one state is because the current political system that we have with the Knesset is completely corrupt and horrible, and we have to create something new that is a republic, that people have a right to defend, but something new. Do you believe in one civilization for both of our people?
If it's equal, right?
Well, I mean, that existed before this. Like, if that's your argument, you say, well, we want something that's more fair. You'd have to dismantle modern Israel. You'd have to get rid of it, right? Because you can't have Zionism in his definition now, where it's just us, just the Jews, our country, our right to represent things our way, you can't do both in one civilization where they could live peaceably equally. It can't happen. There has to be a submissive element that bows down to the Zionist movement. You can't have these things coexist in a civilization that is a Jewish nation. It just can't. It's an ethno-state, whether you want to admit it or not, bud.
Yes.
If it's fair, if it's just, yes.
So let's
if
talk
there's
about
no
how we can get there.
apartheid, well, if Palestinians and Jews agreed to have a one-state solution, it won't be a Jewish state.
It will be a Jewish state.
So that's
So then it can't be. Yep, thank you.
what I'm looking. My vision for it, it cannot be a Jewish state.
Why not? What is a Jewish state that's a problem for you?
Because it's not a democratic state.
But it could be both. It could be both, right?
What do you mean?
No.
No.
Why would it not be a
Democratic states have
democratic
to be
state?
secular.
Oh, sure, but you could have also a culture
Jewish
of a country.
state will- a Jewish state-
a Chinese state, a Japanese state is going to be Japanese by its culture.
But a Jewish state will have rights for
Yeah, not great examples because they're not forcing you to mandate a particular religion. Like, I mean, both of them have kind of evolved their religion to be commerce, right? I mean, there are different, obviously, traditional sects of religious nature in both of those countries. But the dollar, or sorry, their modern equivalents, the yen and the yuan, they're different, right? So, I mean, they're not saying that you have to be this religion to have all of the major rights in this country. Vastly different.
Jewish people more than the rights
No,
of
I
others.
don't believe more.
That's
It's
what
more.
happening.
Actually, the
that's
only
what
thing-
happening to Palestinians who live under the Israeli rule.
No,
in the,
those who are living in Israel,
Oh.
they don't have to serve in the army. They don't have to do a
You
lot of
don't-
things that
you-
they
They're
do.
not
Have you
allowed
talked to them? Have you spoken
They're not allowed to is the better definition.
to any of those people?
Of Palestinians who live as Israeli citizens who
Yes.
don't have to serve in the army and don't have to
they
do
are
shiur
second or
leumi.
third class
They're
citizens.
not second or third
Oh,
class.
absolutely
they
they
are equal
are.
citizens.
See,
Those
I
that
don't
are
know
living in
if
the
you're
West
oblivious
Bank-
or you're lying. I'm sorry.
Does one, if they commit crimes, can they get the death penalty, but the others can't? There's point number one.
I have many
You're
Palestinian friends, Israeli Arab friends that are living in this
kindly
land.
talking softly, but either you're lying or you're oblivious.
Or I'm actually someone who lives in this land, and I'm getting away from the narratives of just
are you
demonizing
brainwashed
completely.
to see what's happening there? Are you in a bubble?
Projection, maybe.
Yeah, are there no gates? Are there no roadblocks? We're basically saying, no, you can't walk this way today. You can't go home, right? This guy, if he doesn't admit that those things exist and no one's hit him with it yet, then he doesn't really give a shit. There's no way he can live there and not see these things. I mean, I'm interested to see where he lives, but if he's anywhere near the West Bank, I mean, these things are absolutely in existence, right? There's video documented proof of this internationally seen, but they're kind of pulling the whole "you don't live here, so you don't know" argument. Yeah, not my favorite.
What you're saying, brainwashing. People have
I'm
equal
saying
rights
that
in the land of Israel.
you're talking out loud and you're denying things that exist.
No, people in Israel, whether you are Palestinian or identify as Israeli Arab or whatever you identify with, if you're not Jewish, you have equal rights
I
to
am
the Jews.
having lunch with people after this who are Israeli citizens, but they're Palestinians.
And what
they
differences
talk
do they have in their rights?
Oh, they talk a lot about how they're mistreated all the time.
Okay, you said about rights. I disagree with mistreatment. It might be individual cases. We can talk about that, but talk about rights. You said that there are different rights and they're second and third class citizens. What rights are different?
Israeli Jewish nationals cannot have someone walk in and say, "This is my house now," and then they get kicked out. Now, in theory, those settlements are in opposition to the laws of Israel. They should be illegal, but they are tolerated and they are allowed to continue by the IDF. To say that they have equal rights is not true. The recent death penalty laws that were celebrated over champagne by the people who voted that through, not the same. Your ability to move freely through this country, right? Israeli Jewish nationals don't have to submit a passport and go through security checks when they're moving from one part of the country to the other. But Palestinian nationals do. Can they be denied access? Yes. There is evidence out there that there is multiple tiers to citizenship in this country, depending on what faith you follow, right? Christians can be spat on by Israeli nationals, right? They can be spat on by Jewish nationals. And it's condemned at the top, but there's a generation coming through that it seems to be, by a lot of this reporting, a lot of these documentaries, a lot of this footage, or listening to themselves, right? You see these calls with like Israeli kids that are getting through on like Omegle, or they're getting through on social media and having conversations with people, especially if those people are Palestinians. The language is insane, right? They view them as less than. And this is a dishonest argument. And I don't know if this guy's being deliberate here or he's got his head in the sand. I have a feeling he knows quite well, but doesn't want to admit it. This is kind of crazy.
Technically, they don't have the same protection.
Of course they have the same.
No,
What,
they
what is the
don't.
different
Oh, they
protection?
don't.
What is the protection I have that an Israeli Arab doesn't?
You can sing and say whatever you want.
They can sing and say whatever
no,
they want.
Don't.
Actually, I can't go to the
No, they
Temple Mount
don't.
and be able to sing my song.
No,
and they're
don't.
able to.
Let's say
So, in the last couple of weeks, every Jewish person was allowed to go and pray as they normally would in their synagogues. But on Easter Sunday, the Christians were denied access to the Holy Sepulchre. Why was that singled out? Why was their movement limited that day? Why was their rights to religious expression denied that day when everyone else was allowed to, on their chosen day of worship, be able to go to their Jewish places of faith? That's a recent example of different rights.
Palestinian Akka decide to say, you know what, I support Hamas. Is he allowed to do that? No, he's not.
I mean, you support an organization that
I'm
wants
not
to kill
talking me. I'm
individuals.
talking as a you an Israeli.
Okay.
You can say that.
If someone here came to the United States where you're currently living and said, I support ISIS, what do you think would happen to them?
But that's equal for all of them.
What's equal for
Regardless of all of them, regardless of their faith, regardless of their ethnicity.
If someone supports Hamas, there'll be a problem.
In Israel, a Jewish could say it differently
Jewish will
than
have
a Palestinian.
Problem.
Not the same.
Yes, it is. You know
Not
why?
the same.
If they're actually plotting to do something.
I'm not saying plotting.
Okay.
I said freedom of speech. You mentioned freedom of speech.
There are plenty of Israeli Arabs who openly support Hamas. You can go to Tel Aviv University. You can go to Hebrew University. You can see them protesting, supporting Hamas, and nothing
Sheikh
happens
Salah
to them.
was been put prison because of that. There's so many
because
people.
They were a part or supporting
No,
or
just
in connection
because of words
not
that they
because
say.
the words that they say.
What we're talking,
what
we're debating
if
here,
those words is,
that
I
the
want to
go to
Israeli
Hong Kong,
Jews
bad
have the
examples,
same
yeah.
rights as the Israeli Palestinians.
Israeli Arabs,
That's the
Palestinians,
Israeli Arabs.
yes, they
We're
have the
talking,
same rights.
They're not.
They have the same rights.
People
Actually,
who live
we
there,
have to do more than them because we have to serve in the army.
I'm sorry for giving this example.
We have to do more than them because we have to serve in the army. I don't think it's a choice. I think that those people don't have the option. And that means that they're not. See, what should happen here is that if a Palestinian national, in my personal opinion, if someone who is an Arab national in Israel says, I want to serve, and that is the pathway to me being treated the same as everyone else because I'm giving you the same service, then that would be great. But they're not given that option, are they? Right? The way this guy's framing this argument is like, well, no, we're doing all the defense of this country. So yeah, of course we're not the same. Like these people, they're not doing what we're doing, but are they being given the option? No. But why not give them the opportunity? It's just like, hey, if you want to show and prove your love of this country, come and serve the same way that we do. And they give them that option to be able to get these same rights that he's denying are currently, everyone gets the same, which we know is bullshit. Maybe that's something they should consider.
I don't want to say it, but let's say a certain ethnicity here in America says all of us have the same rights and opportunities. It's not. It's not the case.
Okay, but why do you keep using examples of other places rather than talking about our own home?
Yeah, it's not a good idea.
To make
We're
it
talking
easier
about-
for you to
we're talking
understand,
about
to get it closer to you, because it doesn't look like you understand what we're talking
The original
here.
colonizers, white people who took this land, who took black slaves, and brought, because that's what you're talking about, and brought them into the society here. And the relationship between the have has nothing to do with peoples who are native to this land together and other people coming in and causing us to fight one another.
What's your ethnic background? Where are your parents, grandparents? Where did they live?
My ancestors come from Israel.
No, after that.
When we were displaced from Israel?
Where was it?
Okay, on my mother's side, Morocco and Algeria. My dad's side, Poland and Belgium.
Okay.
That is the displacement that we went through.
You're kind of half-half.
Yeah, I'm
But
half Ashkenazi, half Sephardi experience.
Palestinian Jews have different rights than someone who never been to
What does that mean, a
Palestine.
Palestinian Jew?
A Jewish person who lived in Palestine
Okay, so you're
before
talking
the
about
establishment of Israel.
So today they're Israeli citizens.
What I'm trying to say, there's a big difference between the rights of a Jewish who came from Poland and Germany and had no connection to the land
Had all
with
the
someone who
connection.
lived there all their lives.
Well, first of all, the Jews that were
Should be.
displaced doesn't mean that they don't come from this land. As Palestinians who are now born second, third generation.
But how do you define that they come from this land? Like, if these guys got the greatest family tree documentation in history to prove that their actual ancestors came from here, or are they defining it by their chosen faith? Because this is where this argument just falls way out of control for me, that they deserve to live there because their families lived there once, or because people who represented the same faith originally were from that region. Because then the claims on nationality and rights across the planet for so many different human beings to countries they've never set foot in for generations, that they didn't, their parents didn't, their grandparents didn't, but somehow now you deserve to have a piece and be the true owners of that land. No,
in
no
Chile,
shot.
in America, in Jordan, and other places, they also have a connection to land. We're not going to erase it because they
not
had
by
a
kicking
displacement.
people out of their
I'm
homes.
against kicking
That's
people out.
true.
We're talking about right now the fact that they had a displacement. It doesn't disconnect them from the,
The
land.
reality
So I
of
would
the matter
appreciate
is-
you not
Yeah, we're against the displacement when it was kicking Jews out of this country, but now that we're kicking other people out of this new Israel to make way for our people, now displacement is fine. That's kind of the argument we're making, right?
The fact
considering
what's happening
let me
on the
respond.
ground.
I would appreciate not considering Ashkenazi Jews as foreigners. When the state of Israel was created, every single citizen of that state, whether Jewish or
How do you
non-Jewish,
see
had
the
equal
Ethiopian
rights.
Jews?
What about the Ethiopian
How
Jews?
do you see them?
I
in
see them as
Israel?
my brothers
How
and
they are
sisters.
being treated?
Actually, my main project that I'm doing in
Are
my
they-
life is bringing back the rest of the tribes of Israel in Africa,
So,
not just the Ethiopians, but the Igbos
I
in
don't know why
Nigeria.
we're having a debate if we agree on everything. We're talking about you came to present the point of view of an Israeli government and the Jewish people. in
I'm not
Israel.
here to present the view of the Israeli government. You were falsely communicated that's what they did. I'm here to represent my own positions, which many Jews and many Israelis believe in, that we can be able to live together. And the definitions that we have are very, very important because you're saying you're not against the right for the Jewish people to self-determine on the ancestral homeland, which makes you not an anti-Zionist, which makes you
No,
not...
I am an anti-Zionist
Well, by
because
a
that's not
different
what I
definition,
believe in
right? A
Zionism.
different definition.
Exactly.
And that's why it's
So
important to
what I'm
understand
trying
the
to,
definitions
what I'm
aren't
trying
what's
to make you
important.
understand that people who are here who
Should I
say we
define what
are
a Palestinian is?
no, but I'm defining
So don't
myself.
define
I'm
what a
talking about
Zionist is.
myself. Everybody's here who says I'm anti-Zionist. They are anti-apartheid, anti-genocide, anti-ethnic cleansing, anti the
They're
brutal
anti the
treatment of the
actions of
Israeli
these
government
people.
of the Palestinians,
But
anti-colonial.
this guy wins the argument though. Like the Israeli guy wins the argument by definition, right? You can criticize their behavior, but you can't. Yeah. We made this point a few times
Anti-confiscating
already,
of
right?
lands, anti all kind of racism and inequality that's happening in Palestine to the Palestinians. That's what we define by saying we are anti-Zionism. That is not a racist, that's not anti-Semitic, that's nothing that has to do with the Jewish faith.
Right.
It's all about the actions and the atrocities that the Israeli government is committing. That's what we mean.
I'm against apartheid, genocide.
So you're an
ethnic cleansing,
anti-Zionist. Good job.
colonization, settlements, which is not.
Good
which
job.
Is,
We
which
are
is
proud
not-
of you now.
Which is not taking place there. Okay, and when you are saying that you're an
Apartheid's not taking
anti-Zionist,
place?
to be anti-something, you have to know what that something is. And as a doctor, as someone who's very intellectual, as someone who lived in this land, has experience, knows other Jews, you should know that Zionism existed before anti-Zionism. And Zionism is the idea that we have a right to
Well,
self-determine on that ancestral homeland.
The way you and your fellow Jewish and Israeli citizens
historically
define
and currently, yes.
and raise the flag of Zionism, that's what makes us say we are anti-Zionist.
No,
Yeah, it's the actions and the behavior. To say that there's no apartheid is wild, though. Like, even the experts on apartheid, the South Africans, right? Many of them agree that what is happening by their own definitions of what they lived through, which was apartheid in South Africa, those conditions are met in Israel. That you do see a separate conditional state for two different peoples in the same nation. Just is.
That's what's happening.
What I'm telling you now, I'm here right in front of you, is that Zionism only means the idea that it should have a right to live in this land, and I'm against the suffering of Palestinians.
On the expense
I'm
of
against
everybody else,
no, not
with
at the
all
expense.
price, with all
Why are you
expense.
always blaming the Jews and Israelis as the expense?
Because that's happened.
No, because you
That's what
see it as a
happened.
zero-sum
Dear
game. There's a
Yassin,
good guy and there's a bad guy.
Anna,
What
and
about
all
the
these
the
places.
communities of Israel that were
We
destroyed?
got to pause here.
Destroyed when? Talking about 3,000 years ago?
We're out of time for this claim. Please return to your seat.
I think what we're going to do, just because obviously this video is so long, I'm going to continue watching it like my own time, but I'm going to jump around. We'll hear a couple of points from each claim going forward, just to speed up the rest of the video.
My next surrounded claim is that Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel.
Yeah,
All
this
right,
is a
if
good
you
one.
would like to be the first debater, get to the seat in 3, 2, 1.
This hippie Tony Stark looking guy in the back that's
Hi,
been in the
it's nice to meet
background the entire
Likewise.
time
How are you?
is not trying real
Doing
hard to
well.
get up front.
Yeah, so I'd like to know more about why you believe that and where that comes from.
Sure. So when I make a claim about the Jewish people, it's never against another population. When I'm saying that the Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel, it's where we come from. If you dig in the land, you find our
Some of
history.
you do.
This is the land that our ancestors have come from. We've maintained a constant presence, and thankfully we were able
Some
to
of
come
you
back
have.
to that land freely.
Sure. Would you identify yourself as a Zionist?
So I'd say that there are many different thought leaders that were involved in the modern political movement called Zionism, and that there are many different branches: the right-wing Zionism, left-wing Zionism, secular Zionism, religious Zionism, even Christian Zionism, which I'm completely against. But the fundamental idea...
Why would you be against Christian Zionism? I mean, it benefits them significantly. I think anyone who's a Christian Zionist is a hypocrite without really going down to it, because the two religions are so opposed on really core tenets then I don't really see how you can be a supporter of both genuinely.
Of Zionism, which comes from the word Zion, which means Jerusalem, is the idea that the Jewish people should have a right to self-determine on their ancestral homeland of Judea/Israel. So do I believe that the Jews should have a right to come back home? Absolutely, I do.
Sure.
But it'd be interesting to see what he thinks the borders should be. Because if they're going back to like older definitions or what was promised to them and, from the Euphrates to the sea and that sort of stuff, does that mean that he believes that they have a right to all of that land as well? I'd be curious to see.
So I was also wondering why, because this is a debate about pro-Palestine versus pro-Israel, I was also wondering why you believe that indigeneity plays a role in pro-Israel actions.
For sure. So to define indigeneity first, if the United Nations actually defined it for what is widely accepted in academic spaces, which is that your identity is the pre-colonial identity that was born and rooted to a particular and specific piece of land that is essential to that people's.
But with what time frame though? Do you know what I mean? Like thousands of years ago is kind of crazy. I mean, yep, certainly the modern Jews who lived there the entire time, as well as the Palestinians and the Arabs that live there and the Christians that have lived there the entire time. Is there not a joint ownership, right, that they've all lived and earned together, that those little individualized pockets, if we took the borders that are out there now, families of each of those bloodlines or each of those ethnicities or each of those religions have lived and existed there for hundreds and thousands of years. So, and along those years, there would have been all different versions of indigenous populations. But he wants to draw a line so far back in time to saying, well, we were there first all the way back then. So everyone else's claims after that point don't matter. And then anyone else's claims before that point of the Jewish occupation or the Jewish ownership of Israel at that time, what happens to people before that? Do they have a superior claim to the Israelis? I have no idea, right? Because we're being very selective about anything pre those 3,000 years ago doesn't count, and anything after those 3,000 years ago, except for the Jewish nationals, they're the only ones that do count. That's why this argument is really foolish.
Identity and way of life. They've maintained a constant presence in that land.
Some have.
They collectively identify with this term. And the reason why it's so important to speak about
others
this
have too. Please stress that point. Yes, some Jews have maintained land and they have been occupiers and indigenous peoples of that land. So have Arabs, so have Christians, and I'm sure others. Where's the acknowledgement of them?
Because there are a lot of people who claim to be pro-Palestinian, who use Palestinian struggles in order to try to delegitimize my ancestral connection and my right to live there. So I'm for the right for other people to live there as well. But when people are trying to delegitimize who I am and the collective that belongs here as well.
But see, by their definition, you can't do both. You can't advocate for those other people to have a right and to be free, because that would be delegitimizing Israel's right to have it be a Jewish ethno-state, right? So you can't have that both ways. They can't exist
That's
together.
when I have a problem.
Okay, so here's sort of where I'm coming from. From what I understand about indigeneity, it is a concept just like intelligence, love, which means that it can be essentially defined by what it is, but not necessarily, it's more difficult to define what it isn't. My understanding of indigeneity, that it has relation against colonialism. Also, similarly, my understanding of Zionism is that, especially through settler action, we know that it is a colonial project.
But like colonialism is really being defined as like, the modern version of imperialism, where like the British, like they did this. Well, I mean, technically what the Romans did was a version of colonialism. What the Egyptians did. Like there's thousands and thousands of years of nations with bigger armies killing off and chasing off other people, and then they dominate the land. Then someone else does it to them. Then someone else does it to them. And then eventually this sort of colonial era we thought had come to a close. Unfortunately, we are seeing a return to it by the way that Israel wants to expand their territory, by the way that the United States is starting to go, well, we can kind of take whatever we want. We can have Greenland. We can take Venezuela. It's going to be my privilege to take Cuba really soon. We're seeing this return to a colonialist era right now. But there's been this real tag that like there was the British colonialism and there was nothing before that. Like even in the Arab states, we saw the fighting amongst each other for thousands of years where someone owned it, then they didn't, right? The Ottoman Empire obviously climbed over so many of those as well. But we're only really talking about, when people talk about modern colonial definitions and, who is indigenous pre-colonialism, how far does that me to go? What is the statute of limitations out there where you can say this country is ours by right because I am indigenous by right? How far back does that go? The Israelis would claim it's 3,000 years.
So it's very difficult for me to understand how you can be both indigenous and the colonizer.
So I look at Zionism as an anti-colonial movement, a movement that the previous colonizers that were here were the British.
You exist because of the colonizers.
Firstly, being the Romans that colonized the land, renamed it to Palestine, and kicked out the majority of the Jewish people. Then we have the Byzantine Empire, we have the Caliphates, we have the Ottomans, and eventually we have the British.
Does that have any say on the Jewish Palestinians who exist, who are not afforded full citizenship? What happens to them? Because Palestinians aren't a monolith, and we
Palestinian
understand.
are not receiving full citizenship. And I
Well,
don't know.
if you're Palestinian, then you don't have full citizenship in the state of Israel.
Jews. Right. So we're talking about now the consequences have happened after the British were here.
Sure.
And the way that British colonized.
Do you think
we got so close? We got so close to him. She should have hit him right there. So, no, you were saying, well, what Jewish people don't have the same rights? She goes, well, I'm not talking about Jewish. Oh, okay, fine. Right, you should have gone, but what about the Palestinians? Stay on this point. Come on, hit him.
Do you think that their citizenship is a direct action of the British?
No, I think that the division of the land is a direct consequence of what the British did to our populations.
Okay.
Let me explain where that comes from.
Okay, we have to pause there. You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Well, I wish you could have finished that point because no. See, the Jewish nation would not exist were it not for the colonials. For the good or the bad, there would not be there if it wasn't for the British and the Americans. Right? Israel would not exist as a Jewish-only ethno-state were it not for that separation to say this can be yours and this one's for the Arabs. And, then the Christians kind of exist somewhere in between, right? That they happen because of colonialism, right? Israel is a consequence of that, sure. But what they are trying to forge it as and continue on, that's all their responsibility.
And good.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Give someone
I'm
you a
good.
chance.
How are you?
Good, good. Baruch Hashem.
So I want to start with something I wrote that you said. You said, return of the people to the land and indigeneity is pre-colonial identity. You were identifying the Jews being indigenous, and that's why they were not practicing colonialism. It was pre-colonial. Would you agree with how I described your sentiment?
So the idea that the Jews should have a right to return to their ancestral homeland is a decolonization movement, not a colonization movement. Now, we can criticize certain policies the government has, the IDF has, and I might even agree with certain things. There's a lot of criticism that I have of the current structure, but by its nature, it is an anti-colonial decolonization movement.
So there
No. It's a colonization movement because now you're only putting your own in, right? You just changed the definition that all those people were allowed to live there under that era, but now you're saying that the rights of the Jews are above all, right? That is ultimately what this is. Israel is, by definition, a Jewish nation, right? If you are not Jewish, can you just live there? No. Can you get the full rights? No. So
words
it's a
in
different
Hebrew
type
that were
of colonialism.
used pre the creation of the state of Israel that mean to settle, to colonize. And they were used in the correspondence of Ben Gurion, the Lehi, and it was very clear that they were using language. It's to settle, to colonize. If they believed themselves to not be colonizers, why were they directly using this language back then?
Back then, what that term meant was development of land. So if you read Herzl's writing, he talks about that the native inhabitants are the Jewish people. There are other inhabitants, what we call today as Palestinians who live there, and we should live together with them.
So we're the inhabitants and then there was other inhabitants, right? So even though we all lived there together at the same time and had equal rights beforehand, technically it was always our land, but there was other inhabitants there too. We're kind of
and
there.
the use of the term colonization then, because obviously today it's not a popular word, we're all against this
Right.
idea, then meant development of the land. So you have to also understand the context in which words are being used, because words are sounds coming out of our
But
mouths,
do you
and the meanings have
recognize
to do.
that right now, because the world, the West has now recognized that colonialism is bad, we are saying, oh, we don't identify with that language. That language meant something back then, and it was used for a particular reason.
And it means different than what it means today.
You dissociating yourself, or Israel dissociating itself from that language, does not erase the preconditions that it existed, the plan that it was trying to achieve.
The plan that it was trying to achieve is to bring back sovereignty to the indigenous population. When you dig in this land, you find Jewish history.
No, but only if you're of one particular faith. Please, someone say this.
This is where we come from. Now, there are individuals that use the term colonization because then it was very popular. And it didn't mean go and exploit another population, take away their resources, exploit it back to a motherland. That's not what it meant, and that's what it means today. And so back then, it meant the development of land. We both agree.
Development of land is exactly colonial language, and it's being used today consistently. This language is
if you are an
consistent.
indigenous person and you want to develop your land, that's not colonization. It is colonization or not colonization.
If people
dependent.
Yeah, but non-indigenous Jewish people moving back, right? Indigenous basically is you're from there, your people before you are from there to a certain degree, right? But all of these things mean that he should be saying here that our claim on this as Israelis should be equal to the claim by the Palestinians and the Christians.
In that land,
But you're
prior
denying
to going
those
to
two.
develop
That's
that
the
land,
point.
they are also
But the Jews
indigenous
had a
to that
constant.
land.
The Jews had a constant presence, and I didn't make an argument against
Jews
Palestinians.
did have a
the
concept.
Arabs,
The
I'm
Jews
not
so did
making
the
an
did have-
argument
Christians.
against
There
Palestinians.
were
I'm making an
Jews
argument that the Jews
coexisting with
are indigenous
Palestinians,
to the land
with
of Israel.
Arabs, with
And I'm all for
Christians,
that.
and they
I'm
existed.
all
But
for
what
that
happened?
coexistence.
The development
Ask
meant
him,
erasing all of that,
Arabs,
meant
British
erasing their
indigenous,
identity of
Christians.
indigeneity
This
as
is what I
well.
was
It was
sa-
just Jewish
This is what I was
indigeneity,
saying in
which
my
is Jewish supremacy.
This is what I was saying in my previous point, okay? The way that the British colonized every single region is they divided and conquered. We can see the consequence of that between Pakistan and India. We can see that in Afghanistan. We can see that in Nigeria between the Igbos, the Hausa Fulani, and the Yoruba.
we can see that in Israel
And we
as
can
well.
see that absolutely, where they
Yeah.
convinced the Israeli population that Palestinians, the Arabs, and Muslims were all their enemies, and they convinced the Palestinian and Arabs that the Jews were just an extension of European colonialism, which you're falling into. And unfortunately, we fought a war
The
in
British-
1948 for which I was not there, and the consequences of that war and the several wars that happened after is the situation that we're in
So
today.
you're saying that the
But he doesn't want to reverse it though. Like, I mean, that's the thing is that there is some truth to what he's saying, that obviously where we're at now and the wars that were fought afterwards was definitely because the British took a piece of that land and said, you all shared it equally beforehand, but now it's only going to one of you over here and one of you over there. But he's not arguing that this should not be continued, right? He obviously wants this to happen because
British
it's in
had
the
a plan
betterment
of
of his own people.
colonization, and that Ben Gurion, Herzl, and every person, or Shamir, the leader of Lehi, who actually reached out to Hitler to work with Hitler to start. You're laughing. Maybe you're not familiar with it.
I'm very
but
familiar
the president,
with the
the
Zionists
leader,
reaching out to the Nazis in
No, but
order
the
to get them
leader-
to let the Jews leave so that they wouldn't
the
kill them.
leader
Not
of
to have
Lehi, who
anything
became
to
the
do.
prime minister of Israel,
And?
had correspondence, reached out to Hitler, and asked for my enemy to work with me to take over the
No.
land of Palestine.
Let's read the fact check. In 1940 to 41, members of Lehi, later led by future Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, sought contact with Nazi Germany to propose cooperation against Britain and support for a Jewish state, including facilitating Jewish immigration to Palestine. Historians say the outreach was framed as an anti-British strategy, not primarily as a plan to rescue Jews from concentration camps. No collaboration resulted. So the attempt, seems like a bit of a nothing point to me.
Palestine to
The
take
that
over
British were
Israel.
the ones controlling the mandate of Palestine at that time.
Exactly.
Not the
So
Nazis.
the
When they-
Lehis,
when
the
the
Lehis were
Zionists-
willing to
when
work
some-
with Nazis.
No, they were not willing.
That's a conflation. I hate conflation on both sides of this argument. To say that they reached out to try and get cooperation to protect and maybe save some Jewish people and make it sound like it's an act of evil because the people you were trying to negotiate with were evil, that's a conflation that's so stupid. It's like people right now who are saying anyone reaching out to Iranian sources to try and get their stance and their opinions on the war reported is evil and traitorism and this, that, and the other, because they're evil by definition. So communicating with them makes you evil by association. I think this is a conflation argument that I deeply despise because it's the same thing that many of the Israelis do in terms of escalating any language criticizing them to being anti-Semitic. I think that this is the same thing. To try and communicate with someone from the Germanic leadership during World War II makes you an associate or a supporter or a defender is a conflationary, stupid argument.
To work.
colonize
They were trying to
Israel.
get their people out of what was being controlled by the Nazis. If you have a hostage taken
wait,
by,
excuse me, I
if
just
you have
wanna
someone
check.
that takes a
You're
hostage,
claiming-
you're going to negotiate with them to get them
This
out
is
of
so
there.
interesting.
So
You're
the Zionists.
claiming-
Wait, let me finish my point because I let you finish.
I just want to ask.
I
You didn't
understand
let
that
me
wanna-
finish. You were speaking the
did it-
entire time.
Yeah, they
You
got to
asked
let
the
more
question
people
and I
on
get
right
to
now
answer,
because these
okay?
people are just
You
doing the
talked
same
about
points
fact
over and over.
That the Zionists had relations and contact with the Nazis. This is
We've
true.
actually got
The
one other
Nazis
lady
had
that
colonized
hasn't spoken
and
before,
colonized,
so let's give her a
occupied
shot.
land. Do you agree with that?
No.
Okay, so in the Torah, it talks about Abraham who came from the land of Ur, not from the land of Canaan. Canaan is modern day Palestine. So if I, a Palestinian, take a DNA test, which I have, my DNA comes back almost entirely Canaanite, okay? If an Ashkenazi Jew takes that same DNA test, their DNA comes back entirely European.
That's
so
true.
talk to me about how you think this is an indigenous, your people are indigenous.
Sure. So I love how you brought up the Torah. And so since we're using the Torah, let's go from the beginning, okay? So you have Noah, who has the ark and has several children. One of those children is called Shem. Shem becomes the father of the Semites, right? All the Semitic peoples are descendants from Shem. Then there's another son called Ham. Ham has eventually a descendant called Canaan, who's born in Africa.
I want to really stick this point, and I'm going to try and do it without offending anyone who's made it this far into a multiple hour video. Congratulations for getting this far. We have gotten to a point in the last 2 years where we are starting to define the world by religious texts, as if they are statement of facts. This is absolutely real, 100% gospel, not in the terms of gospel as in the gospels they've come from, but as in that these are facts recognized by scientists and peers all around the world, right? These bloodlines, these relationships, there's messiahs, there's prophets, all of these are religious beliefs and sectors. And I do not wish to diminish it because I'm not a man of faith in 2026. I really wish that I was a man of faith. But the problem is I'm supposed to put my faith in people who represent religions, who use those religions to slaughter, to persecute, to isolate. And I think most of what is wrong on modern planet Earth falls into two camps. It is either being created by capitalist entities whose job is to profit at the cost of the rest of humanity's development, or religious entities who spend the rest of their time trying to divide us by ways that disempower the average human being and force us to try and fight with each other while they continue to gain cement power themselves. And I think the way it's used is gross. So when I hear people saying that mandates are created by religious beings, that we have the word of men and women 3,000 years ago, and we've had so much loss to history and so many stories have changed over the years, and we haven't seen a God or a prophet or a real one in such a very, very long time, if they were real, which again, I'm not trying to denigrate. I'm a man of science. I just want to say, look, if God came down from any of these faiths tomorrow and proved to the world they were real and said these were the rules, I would be the first one to sign up, right? Because it's from the horse's mouth. To have all of these manipulations of faith and word and text to consolidate power over the years, and then now we're using this to say, well, it was written in a book and this person was of this bloodline, allegedly for thousands of years. We're supposed to now rip up maps and redefine them based on this. I have a really hard time with this, right? And I see more Christian language as well, basically saying that this is how it's supposed to be. And God said this, so therefore we should be doing that, right? Where that impacts the lives of every other human being on this planet that does not follow those faiths, that does not have the belief in those faiths, is going to lead inevitably to more and more conflict because every side is convinced they're right. And now they're so convinced that they're saying, well, this is proven, this is real, even though it is word of mouth passed down for thousands of years, cannot be scientifically proven in many cases. I have a real problem with this religion becoming the new science.
Eventually, the
that
Canaanites
seems to be happening a lot in the last 2 years, especially with the Christians more so.
The Canaanites eventually take the land
Jewish
of
peoples,
the
but
descendants
as well
of
as
Shem, which
Muslims.
are the Hebrews. The descendant of Shem is Ever. The descendant of Ever are the Ivrim, the Hebrews. The Canaanites actually take the land of the Hebrews, which causes the Hebrews to be displaced. That is why Abraham is born in displacement. He's actually the first Zionist. He's the first Jew returning to his ancestral homeland and being able to live there, but doesn't yet have control over the land because the Canaanites still control. Fast forward 2 generations later to the 12.
But see, a lot of these people could have lived there pre-Israel as well, right? Because again, there was not a perfect harmony, but there was some harmony between the 3 major religions living there, right? To tear it up and say now it's just one,
tribes.
why we are
with
where we
Joseph.
are.
They end up in Egypt. They spend time in slavery, and eventually,
Okay.
and eventually they come back again to their ancestral indigenous land of the Hebrews that the Canaanites had taken over. And then there are three conditions for the Canaanites. Either you live with the rule of law, you fight us, or you leave. Some left. Some decided to live with the rule of law of accepting the 7 laws of Noah: no idolatry, no killing, no stealing, no immoral sex act. And those who didn't went into war. So now you talked about DNA. There's no such thing really as Canaanite DNA. They found individual.
Oh my God. Okay, can we please just stop?
No.
Okay, let's have a look. Fact check here. So archaeologists identify the Canaanites as Bronze Age populations living in the Levant centuries before the emergence of a distinct Israelite identity. A major 2020 ancient DNA study published in Cell Press. I don't know how big a journal this is, but let's assume it's got credibility for now. Analyzed remains from Canaanite sites and found genetic continuity between Bronze Age Canaanites and later populations in the region. Many scholars conclude early Israelites emerged from within Canaanite society, not before it. Okay? Seems to be making the point.
This is not factual. I cannot let you
But I'm
go
already
on.
saying, like, the post, right? Is that there are 3 different groups, obviously, that have, or 4 really, claims to this land: Israeli, Christian, Arab, other, right? Everyone who was living there has a history to it, has a tie to it, has the same claim, right? And a lot of them have more modern claim. The Jews who lived there right up until 1948 have a claim because they live there and are still there. So do the Arabs, so do the Christians. I'm kind of boring myself with the repetition of this argument at this
Will
point.
source all of those facts for us and for all the people listening. I let you
They're
finish your
source
claim.
that there's no such thing as DNA.
So I think to summarize this so we can move on to the next topic, if you are going to say that they have this claim because they live there and they have indigenous then so does everyone else. Like, at the end of the day, that is the argument to be made. It is not a exclusionary Israeli Jewish right only. It should be all 3. And I wish someone hit him with this. So let's go on to the next claim. Zionism is not colonization, it's decolonization. Let's listen to a couple of these guys, and then we'll move on to the final topic after that.
Rounded claim is that Zionism is not colonization, it is decolonization.
All right, if you would like to be the next debater, get to the chair in 3, 2,
Give us someone
1.
new this time. Oh, it's Charlie
Rudy,
Kirk cutting out.
I respect your ability to have a
Mason.
calm demeanor, and I think that your patience can do well for an Instagram career. I just don't understand how you can look someone in the face whose family's home has been bulldozed by the IOF and tell him that you see him as a cousin. That is just insane. And I want you to be able to explain to that how you rationalize the incongruity of saying that you are here to protect people that are indigenous and living in the land while whitewashing and carrying water for a genocidal regime.
So the same way that there are many Palestinians who've killed family members of mine, people of mine, I don't see all Palestinians as responsible for that. So if he's going to criticize a policy that was done against his family, I don't know the particular case that happened.
So again, Hamas is a terrorist extremist organization, as is Hezbollah, that they themselves, have definitely killed some of his friends and family. I have no doubt of that. But they are a specific group. Whereas with the Israelis, it's harder to separate that because so many of them have served. So like if you have served in the IDF and you have committed violence in the nation of Palestine, you specifically would be an enemy of those people who have been killed, innocent and slaughtered, even though the people who committed those atrocities initially, the Hamas individuals or Hezbollah, are not the people that were killed. They had nothing to do with them other than the fact that they occupy the same country. That is different, right? Whereas a lot of Israelis are IDF, whereas most Palestinians are not Hamas. That's the big definition between those two.
Against his family, but it sounds horrible. I can recognize that that's something horrible and still be able to see him as my family. What you've currently associated is that anyone who is pro-Israel and believes that the Jews have a right to self-determine must mean that they're anti-Palestinian. And that is what has been plaguing us from being able to move forward, because I see Palestinians as my family. I support the right to live in this land as equal citizens of this land.
I want to
Under our rule and our laws. That's the definition. He doesn't want to finish in that sentence, right?
believe that. I want to believe that those are your genuine feelings. I really do. I'm not going to sit here and criticize your own personal morals or ideology.
Sure.
But what I will say is the regime that you are justifying does not believe that. They do not see the humanity in the people that they bomb indiscriminately.
Right now,
I've
that's true.
experienced the tactics of the IDF, not because I've stepped foot in Israel or Gaza or the West Bank, but because ICE agents right now are currently being trained by the IOF on the tactics to use against civilian populations. They might have different uniforms, but the ideology is exactly the same. You permanently call an
Gotta start
entire
bringing America
population
into the
a
defense,
security
bro.
threat. You militarize enforcement, and then you demand that those citizens are detained or removed in order to show the full force of that regime, whether that is Israel or whether that's the United States. So when I'm seeing that done to my neighbors domestically, whether that's migrants or citizens that are being killed in the street, or I see that in a Palestinian that is under rubble from Israeli bombs, I feel that sense that I know what humanity looks like. And when I see people who defend Israel tell me to not believe my own eyes, when I'm watching videos constantly scrolling of babies being murdered, I cannot sit here and say that you believe what you say when you say that Israel is having their best interests in mind.
Sure. So there's plenty of disagreements that I have with the Israeli government. I don't know one Israeli that doesn't disagree with aspects of the Israeli government, and we can go into those details. You said that Israel is indiscriminately bombing Palestinians. That is not true. What we see, that is not. I let you finish their statement.
I don't know how to.
Right, so fact check again. The claim that Israel is indiscriminately bombing Gaza is contested. The Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and Human Rights Watch have raised concerns about potential unlawful or indiscriminate strikes, while Israel denies the accusation and says it targets Hamas under legal review procedures. No final international court ruling has determined that Israel has a policy of indiscriminate bombing. I disagree. I think, look, by definition, is it indiscriminate? No. But I do think that it is weighed and measured, and they believe that the sacrifice of those civilians is worth their objectives in taking out Hamas. So I would argue it's worse. Indiscriminate would be, we're going to bomb whether there's civilians there or not. We don't know. That would be indiscriminate. To sit there and say, we know there are civilians, we're going to give them a little bit of time to get out, but if they can't, tough shit. We're going to hit them anyway. I would argue that's worse than indiscriminate. That is targeting with intent and knowledge that civilians will die, right? Yes, your military objectives may be achieved at the same time. Maybe they're not, right? But what is the ratio, right? Are they actually considering that? I'd say they probably are, but it doesn't matter. And again, would they do this same sort of tactics if, let's say, there was a huge uprising of a massive Hamas, if they were way bigger than they were, if they had a military, similar sort of scope and size with army tank battalions, the same way that the Israeli Defense Force does, and they rolled in and took a piece of Israel, the same way that they're doing Israel down in Lebanon right now. Let's say they rolled into Tel Aviv and took a big chunk, and there is now a civilian population of Israelis, Jewish Israelis, that are now in the being occupied by the Hamas organization. Would they use the same tactics for bombing that they do now? The answer is no, because they value those Jewish lives higher than the others. So do I think that they're indiscriminately bombing? No, I think they are bombing with intent. They say, well, we told them to get out. They didn't listen. I'm going to kill them anyway. That is worse, right? It is not to defend Hamas's tactics. It is not to defend Hezbollah, right? Using human shields is an act of evil. But it is a strategy that has evolved because in history, it used to work. Because everyone recognized that you should not be bombing civilian populations. But Israel is choosing to do it anyway. And that's why it's indefensible.
Allow you to just say lies like this.
As an Israeli, who served in the army, who was brought back in reserves, and was in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, doing my best to prevent us from fighting and to stop this situation from continuing, it is not true what you're saying. What you saw is Instagram reels. What you saw is videos on YouTube. And
Can't
yes,
believe your
there were
eyes, man.
horrible
It's all edited,
situations
right?
where civilians died, and that's my family. Those are my cousins that have perished due to this conflict. And that's why it gives us a greater responsibility. I let you finish. It gives us a greater responsibility to correct what happened. But Israel does not indiscriminately bomb. It sends leaflets. It calls phones. It does everything that it can to prevent civilians dying. Right? How many?
Yeah, so the fact check that's coming out right now is saying, yep, they have done that. However, human rights and UN officials have questioned whether such warnings are always timely or sufficient to protect civilians.
How long before they bomb a hospital, or how long before they bomb a school?
72 hours. I found leaflets there. Of
yeah, he talks about Instagram. Like, that is the Instagram reel of, guys, just letting you know, I'm going to bomb tomorrow, so please don't be there. I care about you. I love you. I don't want you to be there, so please get out in time. But then they do it anyway, right? So, yeah, again, this is a stupid point. I wish people would hit them harder to go, yeah, they ask them to get out of the way, but they still kill them anyway.
72 hours.
72 hours to leave your roots and communities before we bomb the shit out of it.
To get
That's
out,
what you're saying
because
right now.
unfortunately, Hamas has used your area in order to fight from there and has stored weapons and are using those weapons to actually attack civilians.
Let me tell you, if there are someone that's robbing a bank and they hold up children as human shields, I'm going to say that the police shooting through those kids is not something that we can justify.
No,
so I don't give a
nobody's
fuck what you say
justifying.
about, we're going to be able to use human shields.
Respectful.
That's why we have justification to bomb hospitals. That is absolutely insane.
Of being respectful. If we look at the two,
I said I respect you for it, but I can't do it after you're saying this right now. But I'm understanding what your motives are when you say that you worked in the IOF.
There are over 2 million.
There are over 2 million people. Absolutely not congruent with reality. So let's just hear the propaganda from the professional propagandists.
Okay, projection.
Pause. You've been voted out by the majority. Please return
I
to
can
your
see
seat.
that. Just because, that guy was just hitting on. I can listen to one more of these defenses, and then we'll move on to the next topic.
I'm going to start off with saying if historical connection and indigenous roots legitimizes trumping sovereignty of nations, then modern borders are meaningless. And if it doesn't, then Zionism is a political movement. And we have evidence of this, as Theodore Herzl himself is and was an atheist. We also have quotes coming from Ben-Gurion, who said, we want to expel the Arabs. We also had other people who have referred to Arabs as rocks that needed to be moved throughout the land of Judea. I actually have the name of it right now, Weitzman. I also want to say that we wanted to look at the word of Palestine. I know you were mentioning that this came from the Romans. Actually, Herodotus, the father of history, mentioned Palestine 8 times. It actually comes from a Greek word describing the coast.
Let's have a look. So the fact check on this one, the name Palestine derives from the ancient Philistines, the Hebrew Pelishtim, who appear in the Bible and are often described as sea peoples or invaders in the region. After the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE, the Roman Empire renamed the province of Judea to Syria Palestina. Many historians believe the change was intended to diminish Jewish ties to the land, though no serving arrivement document explicitly states this motive. So, who's the historians declaring that? There's obviously an interest in it. But look, maybe they were too. Maybe they were trying to diminish the ownership of that. But it doesn't change the fact that there was a Palestine, right? That was referred to by multiple different countries and leaders and people.
This isn't a term that came from the Romans of colonizing. And we actively see Zionism Palestine wasn't even the first option. Why did the Zionist Sixth Congress consider Uganda and Argentina? That is a colonial project.
Okay, so let me answer to those things because you said a lot of things. Herodotus that you're bringing up is a Greek person. The pre-Greek population in Crete were the Palestinians. So obviously the collective that is now the Greek Empire would like to call other territories as part of their territory and would call that land Palestine. But the moment that land really became called Palestine is the moment that the Romans conquered, which is way after the Greek Empire is the Romans. And in order to insult the memory of the Jews, they called that name Palestine. Why? Because that's actually also a Hebrew word which means invaders. Now, I don't consider you to be an invader, but you should know that Plishtim, Palestinian, literally in Hebrew means invaders. Now, you talked about colonization, decolonization, indigenous populations. On the territory that was the indigenous population being the Hebrews, the Jews, the Israelites, that was colonized by different empires, there was never a country that was built on top of it since. It was always in the hand of foreign empires until it was revived to being the land of Israel. Now,
So again, because they never built a kingdom on it and they never officially named it, all of their rights to it are gone. This is the argument I've been hearing a lot recently. Whenever anyone says, no, there wasn't technically a Palestine there, it ignores the people that have been living there for thousands of years. Take the labels away, they've been there for 3,000 years. Some of them are yours, some of them are people who you now believe are your enemies, but they were all there the whole time. Just because there wasn't an official nation state label on it, they didn't have a particular leadership, a leader or a king, because they have been, as you said, constantly invaded and re-invaded, right? The same way that you claim that the Jewish people were persecuted before that, these other nations have gone through the same fates as you. They've been conquered and conquered and conquered over and over and over and over again to a point that they've never been allowed to rise again. And then since the 1940s, when Israel was given this opportunity to now rise under their own nation state, they will not afford the Palestinian neighbors these same rights because they don't recognize their right to do the same thing that they're demanding on their
support
side.
indigenous liberations all across the world. The Tibetans, the Yazidis, the Kurds, the Aboriginals.
Okay.
Now, there's different types of indigenous liberations. Some populations want a state. Some populations don't want a state.
So there was a sovereign state of Palestine.
There was not a sovereign state of Palestine. There was a British mandate of Palestine.
Okay, but there were
That is
still
not a
people who
sovereign
identified
state.
themselves as Palestinians.
Sure, I don't have a
until
problem you
after
identifying yourself as Palestinian.
Okay. So what I'm trying to say is that there were people who actually, you don't even need, technically under international law, you don't need to have a sovereign state in order for it to qualify as occupation. An occupation can be imposed on people who are not a part of a sovereign state, but of a collective identity, who have had, as you said earlier, a continuous presence on that land. I think one of the other
Jews had a continuous presence.
and so did the Canaanites and the
Yes.
people who
Canaanites did
converted
not have
to
a
Jew.
constant
I don't want to
presence.
get into
See,
that
why
debate, but
deny
besides
one?
that, there are people who have been there continuously.
The Jews.
And
See, only the Jews? See, this is so infuriating. So was only us. We were there the whole time. We were there the whole time. So were the others.
actually, there is plenty of ways to go about this, but there is evidence that prior to 1948 and prior to the creation of the modern day state of Israel, that there's an incredible influx of people who have converted to Judaism.
This is not true.
Okay, let's have a look. So fact check, there is no historical evidence of a large wave of converts to Judaism immigrating to Palestine before 1948. The major pre-1948 immigration waves, called Aliyot, were composed overwhelmingly of people born into established Jewish communities, primarily from Europe and the Middle East, not mass religious conversions, including from South Africa.
There
Oh, this
is
is not true. That
actually
was
from South
believed anyway, was
Africa. Multiple people
she says not true.
after the
Would you
fall.
believe? Please
no,
fact check.
they will fact check, and it's
will.
written in Haaretz that they
So
after.
you see an anti-Israel publication that posts an article, you read an article and you believe
I don't want to
everything
get
you said?
into. I don't want to get into ad hominem. Let's focus on
not
facts.
have any ad
And to
hominems
my
against you.
knowledge, it is true, and it has been documented pretty well that after the fall of a South African apartheid state, that people converted to Judaism and suddenly had a more legitimate claim.
The fall of the
to,
apartheid state happened way after the creation of the state of Israel. What are you talking
But
about?
I'm just saying that there's an influx of people that came and converted to the state.
No,
Anyways,
they're
I
Jews
want
who are returning home. They're not Jews who are converting
Okay,
in the
so why
masses
don't we
and
have the
returning home.
Palestinian right to return, right?
for that right of
okay,
return.
but how come it hasn't happened? And if we had a Palestinian
That's a
majority,
great
I
question.
don't think
That's a great question why it hasn't happened. The reason it hasn't happened is because my population and your population are raised to see each other as enemies. And when we have conversations, it's always the idea of Jewish indigeneity and our access to the land and our liberation means the destruction of yours. And I'm against the destruction of your people.
Okay.
I'm for the idea
So
of your
why?
people
Okay,
flip you off
Zionism's
too.
earliest founders, and it has been documented. If they're all about, returning back home, why is every single one of their writing about colonial?
Okay, let's fact check this one. So early Zionist leaders framed the movement primarily as Jewish self-determination. In Der Judenstaat, 1896, Theodor Herzl described Zionism as a solution to the Jewish question through statehood and wrote that non-Jewish inhabitants would be left in peace and granted civil rights. Well, that's how it should be. Some founders used the term colonization, which at the time referred to organized settlement. Writings from the period show internal debate, with some emphasizing coexistence and others arguing that achieving sovereignty would require political and military strength. And that seems to be the side that's kind of winning out in
Colonialism,
2026,
yes,
right?
it is. You could look at
Herzl and other individuals spoke about creating a civilization with the other inhabitants
you didn't
who are living there.
recognize my point about Uganda and Argentina. If
That's a
Palestine,
great- thank you.
Palestine was not the only option, which goes to show that this is a colonial
No,
project because
Israel-
they considered other states, despite not.
I think this is a bad point to make for this young lady because they don't have a historical connection to those two nations the way that they do here. So, I mean, if you're talking about like religious context, yes, there is obviously some evidence that there was Judaism links to this nation 3,000 years ago. Of course, no one's denying that point. But then obviously other peoples have lived there the whole time too. But these other countries, yep, they were floated, but obviously it's harder to sell that to sort of say, well, we could have moved them there and that could have been their own country, which would have been for colonization. But the fact that they chose here under a religious historical link, right? To call themselves indigenous, I still think is a stretch, but ultimately to say that there is a religious historical link, the same way that the Arabs and the Christians have the same, or should I say Muslims, not Arabs, the Muslims and the Christians have also very strong religious links to this region, does give it more, what would you say, credence to the fact that, yeah, this was some link to a traditional Judaist homeland. The same way it's for Christians, the same way it's for Arabs, the same way it is for Muslims. They all do have historical connections to that country, which is why they should all have the opportunity to have one democratic United State, or, right, true United State, not Jewish ethno-state, true United State, or you separate it in two countries. Like, I don't see how you have another option that doesn't involve genocide or ethnic cleansing.
Having as strong of a religious claim.
Thank you for reminding me the third claim that you made originally. So there were other options. It wasn't just Uganda. It was Argentina, Bilobijan, Angola, and Madagascar. And this is what the world offered to the Jews, not what the Jews wanted. The Jews always wanted to go to Jerusalem. That's why we pray towards Jerusalem when we get married.
Where does the name Jerusalem come from? Where does the name?
I'll answer that after. When we smash the glass in our weddings, right? I'm sure a lot of you have seen movies or have been to a Jewish wedding. It represents the destruction of Jerusalem and the promise that our kids will return back home and rebuild Jerusalem. Now, Uganda was proposed to the Jews by Herzl. He said, look, I know we're being killed right now in Europe, and we're about to be killed even more. If we don't get to our land right now, at least we'll go to Uganda, and then we'll go to Israel. And the Jews were...
Yeah, I think this is a strong point that she's making here. And it feels like she's going to talk around in circles as a result of this. So look, I think Zionism is not colonization, it's decolonization is the word they're making for. Well, no, it's not, because they're continuing this separation that he's saying has been created by the British, right? So he's basically saying in that statement, it began as colonization and I blame the British for it. To get rid of that, we have to live united in peace. But the actions of the current leadership, of the way that the government is moving, of the way we are seeing persecutions and separation of rights for people who are non-Jewish in this state is at best a continuation of that colonization, or at worst is pushing even further to go towards ethnic cleansing. Because at least during the British colonial rule, right, they were all there coexisting. They may not have liked it, but to say that, you know, oh, we are only enemies with each other because the Brits told us that we should be, is absolving themselves of any kind of personal responsibility, which I don't think is fair to themselves or their perceived enemies. But again, they're making choices right now. And the choices that they are making at a governmental level, maybe not this guy, is still continuing to persecute and to create a colonial separation between these two, right? And the way that they are now looking at expanding this further and further, like these settlements themselves are evidence of a continued colonization. And if it wasn't, then every single one of those settlers would be in jail. Every single one of those settlements would have been burnt down. Or if it was literal theft of existing property of the Palestinians, they would hand it back to them through a legal process. But that is not what is happening here. They're not doing that, are they? So they're not only continuing this perceived colonization of how they're created, but they are now making it their own, right? And the evidence is what I'm going with. Not thoughts, feelings. We're going with the evidence. Israeli settlements in this area are continuing. There is absolutely an apartheid state in the occupied West Bank. You cannot think it is anything other than that, right? I would love to see how you defend that. How is it not when there are checkpoints, when there are ID checks, when different religions get different passes and different levels of respect, right? If you spat on a Jewish building or a Jewish person of faith, like a rabbi in that country, I couldn't imagine what happens to you. But we're all seeing footage as recent as this week of Catholic priests being spat on or denied on Easter Sunday their ability to go and worship their chosen God in their chosen place of worship. Denied in one of the holiest sites for Christianity. Same with the Muslims. They're being denied access to certain mosques because they're saying you don't have the right to, or it's not safe to do so. While obviously there has been no impact or no impedance of the Jewish people's right to express their freedom of faith in that country. So it is not a great argument. The evidence is definitely against it. And I wish people went there more than with feelings with these arguments. I really want to tag into this one so badly, mainly because I want to hear the actual answers to these questions when you confront an Israeli national with it, you know, because he's come so close to saying some of the things that I've wanted him to say, but he stopped short for a reason. He stopped short for a reason. You know, oh, but they live there. No, the Jews live there. Oh, but and the Arabs too? No one asked him that question. And the Muslims, they were there too, right? And the Christians, they were there too, right? So you've all got an even stake. Well, no. I'd want him to say the no part, but he's not because no one's pushed him there. So yeah. So let's go to hear the last claim here, which is obviously the one that gets brought up by one of the 20 crew this time. So not brought up by our Israeli friend here. So the claim being,
in the current situations, we don't see a genuine desire among Israelis to achieve peace.
So I agree that the Israeli government is doing nothing to change the current status quo and benefits from that status quo politically, economically, and in many ways. This is a critique that I have openly in Israel towards the government, towards extremist voices, which to me are embarrassing. The things that they're saying, like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, that are going and talking about ethnic cleansing. This is horrible and not what our culture has to be. And I always tell Israelis that the biggest win of Hamas is not how many Israelis they killed, is how many Israelis they turned to being just like them, hateful of an entire population.
It is sad to think, and this game we can go back and forth and play in the chicken and the egg game. Who caused the Israelis to become pro-genocide, pro-ethnic cleansing? Is it Hamas is causing that? Hamas just started in 1986. And we have to understand that the actions of the Israeli governments, the actions of discrimination and apartheid is what is causing us to have these conflicts and fights between each other. You have the power, you have the military, you have the money, you have the support of the whole Western world. For God's sake, you can do something different about what's happening there. We are tied. We are stuck in the corner. Our kids are being killed right and left. Our homes are being destroyed. You know what? If all what I have is just to throw a little rock at you, you have to understand where that's coming from.
I understand, and I never made the claim that the Israeli hate towards Palestinians that exist comes from Hamas, that has existed since 1948, from the conflicts that we have, even from the Hebron massacre in 1929. I actually go to the British that divided our people. That's where it's sourced, not me or not you, but there are ways to move forward. Now you call,
but it's not denying that it exists, right? It's basically saying, yeah, it does, but it's not our fault so far, right? But I mean, that's a long time to blame them. So, I mean, he has made the point that obviously he wants them to change, but let's see.
Israel and apartheid is one country, one state, one civilization with different rights for different peoples. Those who are living in Israel have equal rights. There's another territory called the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, which has a different jurisdiction.
Prison, a large
which has
prison.
Just different jurisdiction. Gaza has different jurisdiction. I'm against the division of this land. I want to see this land united, but that's actually the opposite of an apartheid, because an apartheid would be one country with different rights for different people. Now we're talking about different territories.
But if they took all those territories, let's be real, that is what would happen. Like, they would expand what is happening in the West Bank, because the rest of that would be now officially annexing these territories. I mean, obviously, yeah, we're ignoring the fact that, 1940, they did create a whole country out of something that wasn't there before. So people were displaced from their homes. But let's say that that is the constant now, and there's no going back. Then on the other side, everything beyond this point is an expansion or an occupation. And the people that live there are not going to be happy about it, right? Under no circumstances. And I cannot see them awarding these people for being conquered with equal rights to those, because at the moment they've provided no evidence that that's the direction they're heading. They are increasing the amount of laws that exist today in the last month that persecute non-Jewish Israelis more, right? Palestinians, right, as they see them, or the Arabs, do not have the same rights. They cannot serve in the IDF. He said that before. They will get the death penalty for certain crimes that an Israeli would not, a Jewish Israeli would not. And there are more and more examples of this, the checkpoints, the separations. Let's see where he goes with this point, because at the moment, he's making this point for the rest of us.
I don't have a right there. They don't have a right here. It's bad, but it's not an apartheid. Now, you said something I actually agree with you. We have the power. With that power comes the responsibility. And this is something that every Jew, every Israeli, every Zionist should listen. We have the power to correct the problems of our Palestinian family and our cousins. And we talk about tikkun olam and ola goyim, healing the world and empowering other nations. Well, we need to do tikkun babaitim abnei dodim. We need to heal our own home with our own cousins.
Israeli government, criminalizing free speech, pushing...
That's not in Israel. That's in America, you're saying.
Yeah, but AIPAC is an extension of what's happening in Israel.
I'm not pro-AIPAC.
That's good to know.
Yeah, I'm not for America getting involved in the Middle East. I'm not for that.
Now, if you mentioned earlier about the division between the West Bank areas, Area A, Area B, Area C. Correct. You served in the army, right? Yes. It's really, do you think they have the full freedom to do whatever they want in Area A?
They don't have the full freedom to do it.
Like, it's just a few miles of distance. People cannot drive out of these areas.
Absolutely.
Young people are losing hope. What do you expect from a 20-year-old boy or a 20-year-old young man who has no hope to get married, no hope to get a job, what do you expect?
No, I understand that. That's why when I look at Israelis who become extremists, Palestinians who become extremists, I understand where it's coming from.
And what are you doing about the settlers?
Enough of us who...
In just a few months ago...
We're going to address the Jews in Judea and Samaria. But just as there are extremist individuals, there are people like us who don't hate one another.
So as long you keep rejecting and refusing to use the word Palestine.
I don't reject the word Palestine.
You keep saying Judea and Samaria. You keep saying that.
I mean, that territory has been historically called Judea and Samaria.
I'm telling you that psychologically, if you want to
thousands of
achieve
years
peace,
ago.
if you want to achieve
justice.
ease, you have to also understand what your words, how powerful
I
they are.
do.
When you keep saying Judea and Samaria, you know what? This is what people call Palestine. This is what people
So
call home.
every time
this
I
is
say
an
Judea and Samaria,
intention.
I say West Bank / Judea and Samaria because Judea and Samaria is not talking about the entirety of what is Israel / Palestine.
This is
specifically what is
what
today the
you're
West Bank.
implying
What
when you
can
use
be.
those terms. But this is what happens in the Palestinian mind.
Where's the word West Bank come from? It's the British that use that term.
What
It is the common
Palestinians-
term.
what
but originally it was
Palestinians-
called
what
Judea and
See, he's blaming the British for creating all this, but he's continuing with that language, like is being made this point right now by the doctor, is that you're deliberately choosing language to say, well, this was our land, right? This is ours, right? Historically, people refer to it this way because it's ours. No one said Palestine. Palestine wasn't a thing. It wasn't an actual statehood. It doesn't exist, doesn't matter, not relevant because not Jewish, right? That's got to be offensive to them.
Palestinians get
Has
in
to be.
mind when you keep using those terms, like, okay, we're next. They're gonna come and take us out. That's
You're
what
right.
that's
And-
what
and
comes
when,
in the
and When
mind.
Jews hear the term Palestine, they think, oh, you're trying to erase us. This is where we need to be able to accept each other's identity. I'm a Jew. I'm a Hebrew. I'm an Israelite. This land has historically, to my people, been called Israel / Judea and Samaria, the
But
specific
your
region.
Only to
actions
his
are-
people, right? Not to everyone. There was a point in time where it was that, and it's been a lot of things since. It was a lot of things
None
before.
louder than
not
your
my
words.
actions, not my actions. Other people's actions
You
that
have
you can
you
condemn.
accepted to serve in the army. That's
I
causing
had
so much
no other choice to
atrocities.
serve in the army. I served
Well, so
proudly
many
to
soldiers,
protect.
so many soldiers are rejecting and
they go
facing
to,
the
and go to prison.
consequences.
I
That's
served-
bravery.
I served.
That's bravery
I
on their
served-
behalf.
I served in the army proudly. You don't have a weak Jew in front of you.
That
You have a
is-
proud
that
Judean
is
warrior
sad.
in front of you.
To be proud of a machine that's killing people
It is
right
not a
and
machine.
left.
It is a
Who
machine
sends them
that
a little
has,
text message,
it's a
get out of your
machine
house
that
before
has
we
its
bomb it.
issues,
That's
that
you're proud
I
of being part
condemn
of that.
certain actions, certain policies, certain things that they do because I'm an
That's-
individual first before anything else. And when there
You
are countries
are-
all around that have constantly attacked and tried to
There's
kill our
nobody
people, without
attacked you
an
unless
IDF,
you're the
we would not
instigators.
exist.
You're the one who started.
No, we're not.
I mean,
didn't you say we shouldn't be pointing at who started the chicken or the egg?
no, I didn't
now you're
say that.
saying
I
you're
said
starting.
that's will be arguing. Now you're saying that
Well, the chicken, the egg, like you can't help going, well, this led to that, then this led to that. I mean, everything comes back to the creation of the modern Israel state. That's the first chicken, right? And then, yes, after they formed that state, after the British, if you want to give them the blame, formed that state, immediately after that, there was other countries that did attack trying to take sections back, right? And they did take some sections away, right? And they kept it for themselves. It wasn't a united front. So this chicken, the egg has been going on now for, the better part of 100 years. It doesn't mean that either side is right about this, but the modern era, which we're talking about right now, is that as he admitted, Israel now has the power to change things. And rather than do that, and rather than try and stop this cycle of violence, they are increasing it to its worst levels possibly ever. I mean, the initial sections where you have the 700,000 displacements of the people who were Palestinians at the time, that would arguably be the worst or the first Nakba. But ultimately, this is the worst in modern history that we're seeing. And this is a choice that has been made by the new Israeli establishment, right? The modern Zionist movement or Israel supremacist movement, right? Or Jewish supremacist movement. It's probably even more specifically accurate. So, again, we absolve the personal responsibility when we can. And then, we have the right to do this now because it was always our land.
These countries are
It's
coming to
really
attack
a
you.
frustrating
Imagine if,
All
if,
the
if,
surrounding countries
imagine
attacked
if,
Israel.
if a foreign country come and invaded California, you expect Texas
Are you
and
saying that
Nevada
the
and
Israelis are invaders?
the Israeli arms
that's a
invaded
conflation.
We're
Palestine.
invaders.
Absolutely.
We're the indigenous people that came back to our land. There was
The
a constant
they
presence
came
of
with
Jews.
them when they came peacefully. We opened our doors for them.
I'm sure.
But when they came,
1929, it was so peaceful.
When they came peacefully, when they said, "Okay, we want to live
Yeah,
here," we
many
opened their
Palestinians
doors.
were peaceful.
Exactly.
Many Palestinians
but when
were
you
not
start showing
peaceful.
you start showing the intentions, when you brought the weapons and you start killing
There
people,
are bad
that's
actors
when
on
people
both
attacked.
sides. See, the difference in this conversation is that there are bad actors.
See, you may not want to hear this, but what's the definition of invader, right? Is it that they came in violently? Is it that they came in peacefully? Or is it the fact that they came in with the intent to say this land is ours now? Peacefully or non-peacefully, there is a technicality there where that's an invasion, right? Now, they're seeing it as, well, actually, we went on holiday for 3,000 years, then we came back. So actually, you've been house sitting this whole time. So now you got to go, bud, right? Figure it out yourself, you got 3,000 years to figure this out, right? You figure out where your homeland is now. It's such an unfair thing. Like technically in 1948 to the established Palestinian or whoever was living there at the time. These people coming back are invaded, right? The perception of these people who have been displaced, the diaspora, or people who voluntarily left, whatever they might be, or more recent Jews, right? All of these people, by technicality, these people have never seen them for theoretically 3,000 years. But now they come in and go, this is ours now, right? You have to understand that from the perspective of the people on the ground who have had these houses that didn't exist because they built them, or their parents did, or their grandparents, or their great-grandparents, they've never even heard of these people being in this neighborhood. And now they just go, we own this now. This is ours. Take it back. You have to understand that that's going to create a generation of upset, a generation of distrust and possible hatred. And that's not to justify the attacks that have come back on the Israeli people, right? But to sit there and just say, well, they had no right and that they're the bad actors for doing it and there was never an invasion, the facts just don't lie with it, right? You may not like the title of invasion, but that ultimately is what it was. Their intention was to live in this country, which they hadn't lived in before. And I mean, those individuals, not the entire people grouped up going back in history 3,000 years. I mean, these individuals that moved back in the 1940s. That's the point I'm trying to make. Those people had not lived there. Their parents had not lived there. Their grandparents and great-grandparents had not lived there. Those ones that came back, yeah, invaded, right? And the ones that were there already maybe expanded their lands. I don't know the history of the families that were already living there, but they are certainly more beneficial than the people who had lived there 400s, 2000s of years. And their rights and their claims of being indigenous to this land are ignored. That is apartheid right out of the gate. And Israel is not trying to restore the rights of those people. Let's be real about it. They are not trying to give them equity and equality. They don't want to. There's no intention of doing that because this is a Jewish ethno-state. And as long as it is a religious ethno-state, this is going to continue. This is a very nuanced topic. It is so hard to get to any conclusive answers. But the reality is this debate is going to keep going on for a long time. And as long as it does, with the current state that it's in, thousands of people are going to die. And we're at a point now where the actions of the current Israeli government is having worldwide implications that is now affecting us as far away as in Australia, right? As far as you, wherever you're watching this right now, events around the world stemming from what we're talking about right now, from Israel and their right to have this region, to have their superiority over their neighbors. And they demand that superiority because they believe that every single one of these places could be a threat. While there is a sect of the religious leadership and the actual leadership of Israel right now that believe that they are entitled to areas of the Middle East under the Greater Israel Project, which is what it's modernly called, whereas obviously from the biblical text is that this is just them getting what God promised them 3,000 years ago. People are dying as a result of these beliefs. There is an apartheid, in my opinion, in this part of the world. There has been a genocide in Palestine. We are now seeing the willingness to try and do the same thing to the people of Lebanon, right? It's already started. And I hope to God that the world starts to escalate. And I think the signs of what's happening with Spain and Italy and a lot of countries actually starting to really start to stand up to Israel and the US on this expansionist attitude of the Israelis to say, well, we need to take all of this in our own self-interest and self-defense, because if we don't, they will take our land from us. But the evidence in front of us is that the only people doing the taking and the people doing the bulk of the offensive actions and the offensive killing right now is Israel. That is not to belittle the losses that have been suffered by the Israelis from Hezbollah and Hamas and terrorist organizations, or the innocent Jewish deaths that have occurred all around the world as the result of those terrorist organizations. They are just as disgusting as what is being done by the Israeli government to innocent civilians across these countries, or the way that they are stealing housing, property, and land from these people who, again, what are they claiming now about Lebanon? What's the historical connection there, right? What's going to happen when we get to Iran if they want to start taking Karg Island or things like that that have been proposed by some members of the Israeli parliament or some members of the United States? How is that this indigenous claim to the land, right? They're going back to religious texts saying, well, technically it was all promised to us anyway. But I have to say that I really wish that I could participate in a debate like this. I really do, because I would love to have, not so much to try and for me to make a point, but for me to genuinely try and understand how you, as an Israeli citizen, right, who believes, if this guy believes what he's saying is true, is not standing out in the streets right now protesting, right? Because it sounds like he's free to do so. That's what he's saying, that he should be able to go there and decry all of these things. But they are cherry picking what they want. And I want to understand that is, how do you think it is right to make an indigenous claim to this country as yours when you didn't have that claim for 3,000 years? And there are just as many people as the historical Jews who live there and continue to live up there up until the 1940s, that the Christians and the Muslims did the same, right? They have the same claim to be there. But the persecution that is happening now, that this gentleman is suggesting is all the British fault, not anymore. You don't get to keep saying that after multiple generations. The actions of the Israeli government in this Jewish supremacist movement that is occurring in Israel right now, the world has woken up and sees it for exactly what it is. Okay? It is the Israeli Jewish people are more important and have more rights than any other human being on this planet. And if you disagree, you're evil, you're Hitler, and you are the equivalent of the worst thing on planet Earth, and you deserve destruction. We'll find you. We'll make you lose your job. We'll bankrupt you. You know, they're the threats being made out there right now. We'll change your laws. We'll criminalize it for you to say those things about me and my country. Even though in your own country, you're allowed to do and say whatever you want about that country. But you do that about mine because we're an ethno-state, because we are hiding behind the shield of a religion that many people of that religion disagree with what we're doing and find it abhorrent, and understand that the actions of modern Israel in the leadership is creating an unsafe worldwide environment for Jewish people. And you would be a fool not to believe that that's true. The rise in anti-Semitic language is horrible. It is horrendous, but it is happening for a reason. And if you want to stamp that out, we need to stamp out the behaviors that are causing the world to realize that this nation, that also happens to be a Jewish nation, right? One doesn't cause the other here, are committing atrocities. And they're doing it in your name. And if they go out there and do it in your name, people are going to hold you accountable. It's not right. You didn't ask for it. You didn't do it. But the reality is these behaviors are creating genuine anti-Semitism out there. And it's abhorrent. I wish it didn't exist, and it shouldn't. We need to do what we can to stamp it out the right way. When it's genuine racial or predispositional or religious hatred, it should be gone. But it is being created and it is being escalated by the behaviors, the direct actions, and the threats being made to not just now the Middle East countries, but now internationally. I mean, Israel's even already threatening Turkey. They're so confident that they've got Iran in the bag and that Hezbollah is not going to be a problem. They're already starting to threaten Turkey, right? They're actually threatening a NATO nation right now, beyond obviously Spain and Italy, who they've obviously cast quite a few stones at in the last couple of weeks. But they're making moves, right? And the world is very, very much not on board. But to say there and say that the world has become far more racist, that the entire planet is the one changing, is some of the most supreme level gaslighting I've ever had the privilege of seeing. So look, this was a long one. If you made it this far, I don't know whether to give you congratulations or commiserations. It's a super challenging topic. This was a frustrating debate for me to watch because I feel like a lot of the 20 had the points that they needed to make in the bag, but they didn't close it, right? They raised the topic, but then when they were given the framework of what to operate, they got real nervous about, whoa, I got to be careful about what I say here. I really wish that they held him to the account of what he was saying to really challenge some of these points. I mean, what would you have done if you were in that chair? How do you guys feel about this topic, right? How do you feel about some of these claims that were made? What were some of your opinions on there? I'd love to hear from you. You can find me at all of my socials at Chewburger84. Obviously, you can find me here on this YouTube channel. You can put in the comments down below. Look, if you did enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. Hitting the notifications bell, all these things really help. But until then, I hope you have a great day, and I hope you join me on the next one. Cheers.